Right, we are now live. Okay, well, welcome everyone to our first webinar on social media and mobile journalism. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules today to join us. It's much appreciated. Just before we get started, I think everyone here is probably aware, but I just wanted to run through Collaborate just a little quickly so you're all aware of what's going on. So if you look down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a silhouette of a person with a green check mark. Next to that is your audio and also your video. If you have a question at any time during the webinar, or you have a question for one of our speakers, you can just raise your hand. So you just click that and I will make a note and then I'll call on you so that you can ask your question. If you go over to the bottom right of your screen, you will see possibly a purple tab, or you'll see 4 little icons: chat, some people, share content, and maybe a settings bar. In the chat, you can go ahead and chat to everyone. You can just click on that and send out a general message like that, where it says hello. And that is pretty much all you will need to know. So we'll have a breakout session later on in the afternoon where people will be divided into groups, and we'll try and have some conversations in mini groups so that we can talk through some issues. But I'll talk more of that as the afternoon goes on.
Yeah, it's a webinar.
So the name of today is Patience, if you don't mind. We're going to go with the flow, as Anthony has he was sneaking a peek at my my notes earlier. But our speakers are in different time zones, and they are slotted in to present before and after meetings, in between teaching schedules. So again, the timings could vary throughout the afternoon, but I'm going to try and stick to things as closely as I can, but I would appreciate your patience if things go haywire in the next 20 minutes. So let me just show you what our agenda is for today. So this webinar is being sponsored here at Bournemouth University by the Centre for Excellence and Learning. So I'm very thankful for them for allowing me the space, the time, and the money to be able to put on this webinar. This is actually our agenda for the day. So Anthony is going to kick us off in just a few minutes, followed by Robin. Then we'll have David coming in to talk about the WJEC syndicate review, which what this is based on from last year. And we will have some more speakers this afternoon. Myself, I'll be talking about Snapchat in Padlet. My colleague Lisa Ruma will be speaking about an experiential project that we've done here at Bournemouth University around covering the US presidential election. We'll also be talking about video journalism and apps. Ji-Hoon Hu is actually teaching right now, so he will be calling in a little bit after this afternoon. And we'll have our breakout discussion groups, and we'll talk about our group findings, and we'll go from there. So just to give you a little bit of background information, Robin and David will both speak to the syndicates in a few moments, but that was our group picture in New Zealand last summer at the World Journalism Education Congress. We were asked to work through a question for 2 days, which was, how do journalism educators revise curricula to effectively prepare students for the reality of mobile technology while maintaining the fundamentals of journalism education? David will go and share our findings with you, but for me, I learned so much at this syndicate, and I came back and revamped all of my teaching for the whole year, much to my head of department chagrin. And then I decided, I was really inspired by the syndicate, and I really wanted the opportunity to keep what I had learned there and the relationships that I'd formed. I wanted to keep that alive. So spoke to Robin and her colleague Eleni and got their blessing, and David Baines here in the UK with the AJE here got his blessing and all this support, and that is how this webinar has come about today. So for me, it's really about a desire to bring colleagues together so that we can learn from each other and enhance the classroom and journalism experience for all of our students. So enough from me. Why don't we get started? First up is Anthony Adornato. I hope I said that right, Anthony, from Ithaca College in New York. He's an assistant professor of journalism and author of the recently published Mobile and Social Media Journalism, A Practical Guide. So take it away, Anthony.
All right, thanks for having me. Ann and I met during AEJ in Chicago in August. And so some of this may look familiar to Ann, my presentation, but let me give you a little bit of the background before I start on kind of who I am. I've been at Ithaca College in central New York for about 5 years now. I was a practicing journalist for a while before then. And when I was hired at Ithaca, it was under the intention that they needed, like most schools, to take a look at the curriculum and figure out what we do with mobile and social media. So we ended up creating a standalone class because, as we all know, there's so many different components to the use of mobile devices and social media in journalism that yes, you can integrate them into existing classes, but it's often gets lost in the mix because for example, video journalism, which I'm teaching now, one of my classes, you mix it in, but the focus is really on the fundamentals of sequencing and video storytelling. So that's how I kind of got to this point. And I realized during the process of creating this class called Mobile and Social Media Journalism, can you see my slides? Is the first one up?
Yes. Yep, we can see them.
Perfect. Yep. That there was really, and this was about 5 years ago when I started creating this standalone class for Ithaca College, which is now a requirement for all of our journalism majors. We have phased out what we used to call multimedia journalism, because really the use of mobile devices and social media for news gathering, distribution, and audience engagement, that is multimedia journalism nowadays. So this has replaced what was our capstone multimedia journalism class. So all students are required to take this class. And what I found when creating this class was that there was no guide per se for faculty members who were trying to figure out how to teach this stuff. My academic research and also my practical stuff they're both based on this, and I merged them together in the classroom. So that's what led to this book, which just came out last month, in fact. So I always start with the why, and I put this slide up the first day of class before we start digging into the nitty-gritty and the tools of helping students understand the why. Why are we doing this? Where have we been? Where are we now? And where are things going? And I really believe that, newsrooms, you're no longer a TV station, you're no longer a print outlet, you're no longer just a multimedia website. Every newsroom is a hub of content. And depending on what the story is, that particular newsroom has to figure out how to package that content on different platforms, which is exactly what my students do, as I'll get into in my class. Also, we use mobile devices solely in my class to gather and produce the content. And mobile devices streamline a reporting process. If you're shooting stuff on a traditional camera and other traditional devices, well, in terms of streamlining that workflow, well, how do you get it from that device that's not connected to Wi-Fi to social media? And then the other thing is the audience is mobile social. And the key thing here is that if we look at least, and I think this is internationally, but specifically in the US, if we look at how people are getting to the content of news websites, it's typically more and more that people are getting there through social media. If you look at the analytics in individual newsrooms, whether it's people directly typing in NewYorkTimes.com, or whether it's them getting referred there by what they saw from the New York Times journalists or the main New York Times account sharing content, increasingly they're not going directly and typing in a URL. They're getting there through these referrals from social media. And when they're getting to news content, it's typically on a mobile device now. So that begs the question of how we structure our content to make sure the audience can consume it on a mobile device and doesn't swipe away. And my last point on the slide is what I just mentioned, of that social media is now a key driver of website traffic. And the audience is likely viewing on a mobile device. So I'll get into Snapchat in a minute, but this hits home that point of looking at where the audience is now and being innovative. So NBC News here in the US, they just hired a team of 30 and launched a Snapchat newscast solely for Snapchat. This team solely works on a newscast for Snapchat. And the idea is, if we look at the analytics, is that the younger demographic, they are on these social platforms. And while TV news, at least in the US, is still doing well in terms of an audience, if we look at that audience, it's the older demographic, the baby boom generation. And this younger demographic is not going to change its habits. You know, once it turns 40, the younger generation, it's not all of a sudden going to say, oh, I'm going to turn on TV news. So the idea is innovative, right? It's the idea that we need to get them underneath our brand now and get them in. And I know this chart to the right here is probably a bit hard to see, but this was a Pew study that came out within the last month. And the top bar shows the top 3 items listed are Twitter, YouTube, and Snapchat. And those, if we look at growth year over year, those are the 3 that are showing the most growth in terms of where people are going to get news. Snapchat in particular, it's pretty much more than doubled from 2016 to 2017 in terms of where people are getting news, particularly with the younger demographic. This is focused on the younger demographic. And certainly we look beneath there in Facebook, 68% getting their news. This is in the US, adults from Facebook, but that has leveled off. If we take a look from 2016 to 2017, there's not much of an increase. So my whole thing that I get students in the mindset of is like, not where we are now, but looking at trends to see where we're going. So, 2 examples. My student on the left here, Emily, graduated a year ago. She is a Hearst Fellow. They choose 6 out of about 2,000 applicants. The guy on the right, Eddie Dowd, another one of my students, he's in local TV news. Both of them during the interview process were given scenarios and said, give us a game plan not only for TV, not only for the website, but how would you write this and actually write it for us and structure it? How would you write this for Facebook? And what would you share, and give us the logic behind that? What would you push out on Snapchat and then Twitter as well? So this is the idea that students need to think beyond just one platform, and each platform has a different language. So when they take a story, what are they doing across platforms? So typically the story pitch, traditional story pitch, I do this in Intro to Journalism, is like story focus angle, news peg, like who cares? Why should the audience care about this? Real people, making sure when we can to humanize our stories and integrate real people. What other data or more harder, quantitative information do we need to integrate into our stories? And then the visuals, in terms of video and still photos. But there's a huge missing component to these traditional story pitches. And so in my classes, particularly my mobile social, every student, of course, has to come up with these traditional things when they pitch a story, but they also have to tell me what they plan on doing for mobile and social media. Because the reality is, if we're not putting that right at the forefront of their mind, this is missing the mark in terms of what's actually happening out in newsrooms today. And even outlets like the New York Times have scrapped their A1 story pitch meetings, and those meetings are now focused on what gets the best play on mobile and social. So the 3 buckets, they have to kind of go through our news gathering. So you have a story, you're looking for a story or for sources related to a story. And so how are you going to use social media in terms of finding sources or perhaps story ideas if you don't have a story? Distribution, so what are you going to do as you reporting during that process of when you're out in the field? What are you going to share and on what platforms? And then how are you going to engage the audience? And I throw this up here, I won't go through this, but this is kind of the 3 buckets. And I give them this toolkit within the first couple of weeks of class of like, here's what you can do during news gathering, right? Searching keywords, using Twitter lists to organize sources, monitoring the social media pages of nonprofit organizations, things like that, and so on and so forth. So this is a guide, in essence, to help them come up with that mobile and social part of their story pitches, which, I always hope by mid-semester becomes second nature to them, so they don't necessarily have to look at these 3 buckets. So sample assignments, these These are pretty basic. I'll get into the more detailed ones in a minute, but and these can actually work across courses. I use these in courses I actually teach that are not specifically journalism related, but reading. So, right, tweeting about the readings and interesting facts about the readings, and mentioning the authors. So, for example, Dan Gilmore has a great book that is a bit outdated now, but really hits home some of the concepts we're talking about now. He was really innovative in terms of when he wrote this 10 plus years ago in terms of where things were going. So I used to have my students read this book and tweet about it and mention him, and he would interact with them. You can do that with guest speakers as well. I organize a social media scavenger hunt that I usually post on the Online News Association Facebook group, the ONA Facebook group. And for example, this year we had about, I think, 24 schools take part, mostly in the US, but some in other countries as well. So I come up with a list of 10 things. We have a hashtag dedicated to this. And so students who take part in this from all over the place are tagging all of their items with this, and it creates this collaboration among journalism students. The big thing, and I think this is a hidden gem in terms of Twitter, is creating Twitter lists, of putting credible sources in Twitter lists. So on Twitter, it's a whole lot of noise. And so if you want to create just a list, for example, of local sources within your community, that if you click on that list, you can just see tweets from those people. And I have my students do this for our area because that can be a way for them to find local story ideas. You can do that on Twitter to filter out the noise. And then oftentimes, I create a Facebook group for each of my classes, and I usually have some sort of Facebook question of the week on there. So in terms of my mobile and social class, this is the main assignment. They turn multimedia stories every other week. And the main portion of this is a 500 to 550 word text story that includes a photo gallery, a video of a minute to a minute and 30. All of this is gathered using iPads, and we're fortunate because we're well funded that we give iPads to all of our students for the semester if they don't have them. But the key thing here is not just writing a story, not just putting together a video like you traditionally would for a TV newscast or something like that. The key here is thinking about that mobile and social audience. So what you see on the right-hand side is a very good example of what I have my students do in terms of making the content what I call snackable. So for someone on a mobile device, you can't just dump in 500-600 words and that's it. They need these kind of like guides to segment out the text on a mobile device. So I usually have them do key points off the top. And the BBC actually has this as one of their guidelines in most of their stories. Straight off the top, before even getting into the narrative, someone should be able to know what the heart of the story is about. And then I give them a social media checklist for every story. So for every story, and for example, this is the checklist I gave them this week. During the reporting process for that story, they have to tweet at least 4 times, and they have to social media optimize those. So they have to mention, use hashtags, stuff that will lead to increased engagement instead of just tweeting out text and that's it. This week they have to produce one readable video, which I'll get into shortly, meaning that the video has to have text and captions on it, because we increasingly know that with people on mobile devices, they often aren't in a place that they can turn up their volume. So they need to, if the video is intended for a social media platform, they need to be able to understand the context of the video without turning up the volume. And then I have them do, this week 2 photos, share to Twitter and professional Facebook page, pretty basic. These are the apps we use. There's a lot out there. We've tested out a ton over the years. This is what I found out to be the most effective. For video, we use Videolicious for kind of the quick social media teases. We use iMovie app for the video they embed in their story online. There's photo editing apps, audio, the social graphics apps, which I'll get into. We use Adobe Spark and Canva. And then they all have Dropbox and Google Drive on their devices, because this is a very easy way for them to drop any sort of content from their device into a shared folder for the entire class when we're working on projects, and anyone can access it anywhere who has access to that shared folder. I'm going to skip through this slide, but this is the basics of like what we're using in terms of add-ons for the iPad minis. So on the left-hand side is what's called the iRig Pre. And so this basically is an adapter that plugs into the iPad. It then allows you to plug in an XLR cable with a microphone. So as we know, I think two of the downfalls of shooting with a mobile device are audio quality in certain cases and shakiness. So this actually allows you to plug in a real mic. In the middle is a case called the iOgrapher, and this is a case that has basically two grips on the side. They can hold or they can attach to a standard tripod, and this provides some stability. And then on the right, we also give them the option of using the iRig mic field, and this plugs directly into the device. I like using the iRig Pre. I think it's a hardier mic. You get better audio quality, but the iRig mic field, the one on the right, it works out. If you're in really noisy situations, I don't recommend it, but it works pretty well overall. So readable video, which I mentioned, this is key. I mean, the trend now is, again, with people on mobile and social mobile devices who are getting video on social media platforms, they're scrolling through. They could be in a public place where they don't have their audio turned on or where they can't turn on their audio. So for my students, for several of their videos that they create specifically for social media related to their story, they have to put in subtitles. And the use of big fonts, color blocking to make words pop or things stand out. And then of course being aware that there can be too much text on the video. And this can be done in the iMovie app. There are a bunch of other apps out there too, but we usually use iMovie. The trick with iMovie, though, is the app anyway, is that you can't do color blocking in there. So it would just be the straight one, color font type thing. I have had students who have shot their stuff on their mobile device and then put it into iMovie on their laptop, which is fine because it gives you more flexibility in terms of doing stuff with text, the iMovie on a laptop, on a desktop. But again, I remind the students the whole point here is being nimble with mobile journalism. So if you're shooting on a mobile device and then have to get it onto your computer, that workflow, isn't exactly streamlined. Social graphics, this is another thing that students are required to do periodically throughout the semester. So both Canva and Adobe Spark, and we've been using Adobe Spark up until this point in the semester, are very, very easy apps. Within, I would say, 5 minutes, you can create one of these. And the idea here is that, one, it helps to optimize your posts. It gives a visual. And two is that in cases like the examples I show here, it allows you to give folks more information in a visual way than just putting the information in the text part of a social media post. So this is an example of one of my students last week who had interviewed someone as part of our social media scavenger hunt. And one of their requirements for that is they had to create a social media graphic. So my students simply open the app, put this student's photo as the background, and then put some text over. And this app allows you to choose which platform you're creating the content for. So it will resize the image. If you choose Twitter versus Instagram versus Facebook, it resizes it for you according to the specs that work best with that platform. The other big thing that I really hit home, we all know search engine optimization. I mean, that's been around for a while, and that's still important, of course. But increasingly important is the idea of SMO, or social media optimization. So the idea of taking a second to think of what, before you post, what are you doing with that post that could get more engagement? And typically, right, these are things like visuals and research. I mean, it seems pretty logical that research shows visuals get a ton more engagement, hashtags, at mentioning, things like that. So in terms of social media optimization, I really get students to think, how their posts are crafted and published for maximum audience engagement. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this is increasingly important because it's becoming less frequent for people, at least for news websites here in the US, and Pew Research has showed this, to come directly to a news website. it's becoming increasingly more common for them to get there because of the outlet's journalists sharing content and pulling them back to the news outlet's website, or the news outlet's branded account sharing content that's optimized and pulling them back in. And I don't include it in here in this session, but as part of my class, my students also have to use their Twitter analytics, their Facebook analytics, and their website analytics. And what they notice when looking at the analytics, for example, on Twitter, is that their posts that are social media optimized, so have a visual, hashtags, @mentions, 9 out of 10 times do a heck of a lot better in terms of engagement than the ones they share that just have text. How am I doing on time, by the way?
You're doing fine, Anthony.
Okay.
Yep, you've
got
your time.
Okay, good. So I'll probably take another maybe 5 minutes, I think. So let me, because I know Ann is digging into Snapchat later, but let me just fly through this. So we, about a year and a half ago, we partnered with NBC News. We signed on as freelancers to cover the South Carolina Republican primary, which was in February of last year. It seems like 10 years ago. But considering everything that's happened since then, but that's another story. So anyway, we partnered with NBC News, and this was a great example for our students. We selected 9 students, a colleague and I coordinated this with NBC News to cover the primary for NBC News. And this was a really, really good example of a traditional broadcast outlet not being a traditional broadcast outlet, right? They are taking a story, a big story, and they have teams coordinating how this will live on nightly news, how this will live on Instagram, how this will live on their Snapchat, and how this will live on their website. So our 9 students were part of all 4 of these buckets. So we had 2 students shooting content along with their correspondents that made it on NBC Nightly News in 2 packages. We had a team of 3 students using iPads and taking over the Instagram account for a day, talking to the youth who were on college campuses in South Carolina and getting kind of the pulse among the youth in terms of this election. And so the students, my students who were doing that, were using iPads, producing the content on iPads, and then Dropboxing it in a shared folder with the producers back at NBC News in New York, who were then sharing the content on their NBC News Instagram account. From my phone, I was logged in with NBC News' credentials, and the 2 students you see in the photo here, we took over NBC News' Snapchat that day. And then we had several students write multimedia articles for msnbc.com. So this was a great example for students of how we take one story and how we package it across multiple platforms. And so this is a Snapchat assignment that I'm actually giving my students as part of their social media to-do list, their next one, and I've done this in the past couple of years. So as part of their story that they're covering that particular period, they have to produce a Snapchat story while reporting. They have to cross-promote this at least once on their Twitter and their professional Facebook page. And so basically they will start their Snapchat story, and they have the ability on Snapchat, in case you guys aren't familiar with Snapchat, and my students always laugh at me when I explain this to them because they're like, duh, we know that. But they have the ability to save the individual clips to their phone that make up their Snapchat story. So what I have them do as their first element of that Snapchat story is do a video intro. I'm Anthony Adornato, I'm out here wherever, and I'm going to be covering this over the next day or so here on Snapchat. And then they download that intro portion to their camera roll on their device. And then they share that to their professional Facebook page and their Twitter account. And then basically it's a cross promotion. They link back to their Snapchat account, telling people that this is what they'll be doing on Snapchat today. The snap code is basically what you see on the right. So every account on Snapchat, everyone who has an account, gets a snap code. And so a lot of times students decide to use that as well and attach that to both their Facebook and Twitter post to cross-promote, because the snap code, anyone who has Snapchat can open Snapchat, they point their camera once they have Snapchat open to the snap code, and they automatically go to your Snapchat account. Now, once students have completed the entire story, Snapchat story, I have them save that to the entire thing to their mobile device, and then I have them upload that to their YouTube account. And I get that link, and that's how I grade it, because God knows I don't want to follow all my students on Snapchat. So I have them do that. This was a video embedded. It doesn't play here, but Anne will share all the PowerPoints later on, and you can check out this embedded video of a correspondent from NBC News. NBC actually uses this video as in their training for their correspondents for Snapchat. So I highly recommend. He does a fantastic job of using, basically speaking the language of Snapchat, right? And so here are some key things. Shooting vertically, starting with a video intro. NBC News, for their correspondents, recommends that they have 10 to 15 snaps per story. I think for the stories my students are covering, that's a little too much. The other thing to keep in mind is varying video and photos. So you just don't want video, video, video. You want to vary that up. And then using basically the language of Snapchat, right? So the filters, the color text, all that stuff that would never really work on Facebook or Twitter, but this works on Snapchat because that's the language of Snapchat. And keeping in mind, particularly if they're using interviews in their Snapchat story, keeping in mind that readable video concept of putting text there that kind of summarizes what that person is saying. And this is a video of the cross promotion I was talking about. That'll be in the PowerPoint that Anne sends as well. And then in the PowerPoint as well will be my students' final video that you can play. And this is the video on the right-hand side of their takeover that day in South Carolina. And so challenges as I wrap it up. Grading is a huge challenge. I think I've got the workflow down now. Basically with the days that the stories are due, that everything is due, for example, I will have them published to, we don't use Blackboard, we use a similar system though. They upload one document. In that document, it has the final text of their story that's published on their website. It has a link to that final published story on their website, so I can see the layout and see the photos and look at the video and critique the video. It also has a link to a Storify link. So Storify, if you're not familiar with it, is basically a platform that allows you to aggregate social media content from all different platforms. So what they end up doing is they create a Storify, basically pulling in all the social media items that they were supposed to do as part of that week's story. So I don't have to go to all their individual social media accounts. That would take forever. I simply click on this link that they've created through Storify, and right there I can see all their social media posts that they completed during the reporting process. Certainly, I encourage the use of mobile devices during class because a lot of what we do is focused on that. But it is a balancing act. So, if there are times where it's discussion only, I typically have them put their devices away because I've learned it just ends up being too much of a distraction. I'm probably too lenient on this. But again, as you guys know, it's a balancing act. Access to mobile devices, I found that most students do have mobile devices that they could use for all of this, but the problem is that many of them don't have enough memory space on their devices. And so with the apps we're using and stuff like that, that can be challenging. As I mentioned, fortunately within the Park School of Communications, we're well funded enough that we can give our students access to iPads for the entire semester, but that's obviously not the case everywhere. So that's just something to keep in mind. Of the first time I did this class, we didn't have mobile devices for everyone. So I had to do like a technology survey of like who has what, is it the iOS platform, is it another platform, and kind of go from there in terms of figuring out if everyone was able to do all of this on their own device. Certainly maintaining the fundamentals of video and audio, because the tendency I find is for people to, when they shoot video on an iPad, is like just, zoom pan and tilt all over the place. But I tell my students, like, you still have to remember those fundamentals of sequencing and close-ups, medium, wide shots, and stuff like that. And then audio, as I mentioned, is definitely one of the downfalls of producing content on the iPads or any mobile device. But we've we purchased those add-ons that I mentioned, the microphones to help with that. The other thing is inconsistency in social media posts. So the whole idea, right, is to take the audience along for the ride with you as a journalist. Well, sometimes students, they see it as just a checklist of what they have to do. So literally, when their story is due, close to deadline, they decide to post all of their social media stuff. But that, it defeats the purpose of this like reporting as a process type thing. No, you have to be doing this while you're out on the field. You can't just dump it all at once. And then I think for me in particular, it's this idea, like balancing act of techno stress, right? Like these students in this class, I have a Facebook page for them. We have a Twitter hashtag. So much of what we do is focused on social media, obviously, and it serves as a back channel as well in terms of complementing the in-class conversation. So that, I think for all of us, is something that we're all trying to figure out of like how to balance this, particularly when you have a class focused on social media in particular. And my last slide here is, I would recommend looking into like these partnerships that are out there. Google News Lab has some great resources, and they were at AEJ, and they're building stuff in terms of data journalism, mobile journalism. Hootsuite is an online social media dashboard that allows you to have all of your social media. It's basically a social media command center, similar to TweetDeck. And so this allows you basically to connect all your social media accounts and just open Hootsuite, and from that dashboard, you can see everything. You can also share posts via this dashboard, so you don't have to open up Twitter. You don't have to open up Facebook. So my students, this semester, Hootsuite has an educators program, and so my students go through the training modules for Hootsuite, and then they get the Hootsuite certification, which is typically $100. Videolicious has a premier version, so like a souped-up version that newsrooms, at least here in the U.S., it costs about $10,000 that we at Ithaca get for free. Other schools can get it for free as well, and so this allows us to have access to all of the features as part of Videolicious and not just the free features. Banjo also has a university partnership program, and this is an app that basically allows you to search for content based on geolocation. So I can literally open up the app. They do have a free version as well. I can open up the app, I can type in an address, it will take me exactly to that address, and it will, on a map, show me pinpoints of everyone who has a public account who is sharing content in that area across social media platforms. This certainly can be super helpful during breaking news situations. If you're doing, social news gathering, of course, the next step is, verification and all that stuff, which my class also entails. And then Parsley is an analytics platform that a lot of newsrooms in the US are using. And they also, for student media, so our Ithacan, our student newspaper, for the last year has gotten this for free. It's an analytics platform that's applied to the newspaper, our online newspaper's website. And that wraps it up for me. I know I threw a lot out there, as I normally do to my students as well. So I don't know if we're taking questions, if everyone has them, or if we're just moving on.
Yeah, so yes, if anyone has any questions for Anthony, could you please raise your hand? Okay, Sally Ann Duncan.
Hi, Anthony. That was a fantastic presentation. Thoroughly enjoyed it. And
thank you.
I've learned a lot. I would like to ask you a question about how you manage the time for your classes, because I find that when teaching social media, the time disappears, and some students learn very quickly and others are dragging behind. So I spend a lot of time talking, but not really sure that the students have learned what I want them to learn.
Yeah, no, and I get that, because I'm about a week and a half behind in my syllabus, to be honest, where I should be. It's a balancing act, and I typically start out with a good, so my classes I teach are an hour and 40 blocks twice a week, Monday and Wednesday. So I typically start out with about, I would say 30 minutes of kind of tradition. I don't want to say lecture, it's lecture and discussion to just go over like the basic concepts. If it's an app, I plug in my iPad, I walk them through, I tell them do not open the app yet, do not start doing anything, because once they start doing that, you've lost them, as you guys know. Watch me walk through it, then we will take the next 20 minutes to do it. So for example, for the Canva app where you create the social media graphics, I introduced that to them last week, and so I spent the first 10 minutes just going over the why. Because I always feel like it's a little bit more theoretical, I guess, for them, but like, why the heck are we doing this? So I always like to bring in any sort of data, real newsrooms examples, research before I actually get into the practical stuff, because I just think they need to get in that mindset of understanding the why. So in that case, I brought in social media optimization and why that's important, and how this is one way to optimize your posts to make them visually compelling. And then I said, okay, don't open this yet. I hooked up my iPad, I walked them through, and then I gave them 20 minutes to create a social media graphic for the story they were working on. And then I had them tweet those out with our Clash hashtag, and then I pulled them up. Typically that's how it's structured. It doesn't always work that way though. But that's typically how I like to structure it. And it just kind of depends, what I'm teaching that day.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. All right, thanks, Eliane. Summer Harlow has a question for you, Anthony. Summer? Summer, we can't hear you. It might be a volume. Okay, Summer, we'll come back to you. Simon Pipe had a question.
Oh. Hello, Anthony. I greatly enjoyed that, and it was easy to follow. We are also struggling with this problem of students either not having the right phones or not having the spare memory. And also I'm worried about them dropping their phones when they're doing work at our bidding, which I think is tricky. So we are thinking of iPads. I've just asked to be given one, and they said yes. I couldn't believe it. But we're concerned that I'd had advice that iPads were too big and cumbersome, and that they get in the way, between you and the interviewee if you're doing interviews. I wondered how the students found. I know you're working with iPad minis.
Right.
Sure. We also need our students to. We give them laptops at the moment, MacBook Pros, and these iPads would still have to do the job of the iPad Pro. So I wondered how students found it working with a larger device.
Yeah, so we use iPad minis versus the iPads. To be honest, they have actually found, because these students who take this class have already taken, for example, visual journalism, which they learn how to use the traditional cameras, the big cameras to go out and shoot traditional TV packages kind of thing. So they actually have found, and this is anecdotal, of course, that it's less of a barrier between the interviewee and them, because when the interviewee sees the big camera coming, as my students realize when I teach them the visual journalism class, they're like, oh my gosh, this is so much harder having a big camera, because they get freaked out because we have this big intimidating camera. So they, anecdotally anyway, have found that it's less intimidating, and so they're actually able to approach interviewees more easily, and perhaps have a more natural conversation with them. That's just anecdotal, but yeah.
Thank you. Okay, our final question is Summer Harlow. Summer, are you there?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you again for this. I appreciate it. I have a two-part question. First is related to the equipment. You mentioned the mics that you use. Do you just have a couple that students can check out, or does every student get those mics?
Yeah, good question. So So we have the iPads, we have them for everyone. But with the mic situation, we have a limited number. And so the way it works within Park, every year we have this technology purchasing committee where we can put in for what the department needs. And so to be honest, we have far too few accessories for students. So right now, for example, we only have maybe 5 of each of those that I showed you. And now with this class being a requirement, we're going to put in, and we'll get it because they're so inexpensive for the starting next academic year to have at least double, but probably triple the number. And the way it works is we have within our communication school, one area for all equipment, whether it's cinema, photography, that students, they reserve online and they go to pick up at this place. So they essentially manage, I don't have to manage the equipment. So all these add-ons, as well as the iPad themselves, the students actually reserve through our what some places we call the cage, and there's a whole team that manages that and manages the equipment.
Okay, and then the other question I had is related to the assignments that you give out. Are students working in groups, or is this all individual work? And then because there's so much reporting that they're doing, do you have any other outside assignments at all, like going to talk to a reporter who does social media and interview them?
Yeah, good question. So, so the students work fly solo because it's a senior class and they're about to go on the job market, and the reality is they're going to be working alone in the field. I would rather have them double up because it would be less grading for me. But again, thinking about what they're going to be up against, I just feel like that's not reality here. So they work alone. So for example, the last story was due last Wednesday, and I teach 2 sections a semester, so that was 35 stories that I basically spent 3 days grading straight to turn them for Monday, for yesterday to go over in class. So the grading is heavy, but yeah, they fly solo in the field. Yes, there are a number of other assignments, and in fact, my syllabus that outlines all the assignments. I should have put this on my PowerPoint slide. But if you go to mobile and social media journalism.com, so that's the website of my book. Through there, you can actually get to my class syllabus is actually for this semester is actually listed on there. So it's mobile and social media journalism.com, and that lists all the assignments. So for example, I have a drill section. So it may be as we're learning the apps, they have to go out and do a drill with the iMovie app. At the end of the semester, they all have to do a portfolio presentation where they just, in a quick 5 to 8 minutes, tell the class what they learned, what worked, what didn't during the semester. And as part of that, they have to integrate in what they learned by keeping track of their social media analytics and how that informed their kind of decisions throughout the semester. And then I also have them do this is a group project where they have to pick an outlet, and they have to analyze the social media strategy, social media policy, if it's publicly available for that outlet, and they have to analyze that and give a presentation on it. And as part of that, they have to include 2 journalists who work for that outlet as part of that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Anthony, thank you so much for your time this morning and for that wonderful presentation. Really appreciate you getting up early to come and talk to us.
Thank you, it was fun.
Good, good. Next up we have Robin Goodman, who is a professor of communication studies from Alfred University in New York. Robin and her colleague Eleni Stein, who couldn't be here today due to research commitments, we all know how that goes, created the syndicates for the World Journalism Education Council. Robin is going to be talking to us today about challenges and innovations in journalism education. So Robin, over to you.
Okay, now do I look in your face? Is that where I'm looking? My
you
eyeballs look in the right place? Okay.
Yep. So if you just go in and share your PowerPoint, then that PowerPoint will come on up.
Okay, let me do that. All right, let me see.
Hang on.
Whoops.
Here you go.
Oh, it was all going great a minute ago. Let's see. So I'm going to go to the share files.
Yep.
Go back to my thing. Now I'm going to hit share now, right?
There now. Yep.
Okay. I see it. Do you guys see it? I see a person, but I don't see my first slide.
There you go. We've got it.
Okay, here I am. Hi. Again, thank you, Anne, for inviting me to join you here. Looks like I'm representing the World Journalism Education Congress today. I'm a board member, and so we're really thrilled that the syndicates have inspired you guys to keep working on the topics and even encouraged you to redo your syllabus at the last minute. I'm thrilled. I've been working on the syndicates from the very first WJEC in Singapore. We're going on our 5th one now. And basically, just quickly, I mean, Anthony did a wonderful talk of what he's doing in the classroom, and I want you guys to get back to that as soon as possible. So I'll just tell you quickly about the program that inspired you guys, and I hope will keep inspiring you because we really believe at it very strongly at the WJEC, and we're going to keep doing it. For those who don't know, the World Journalism Education Congress is the first known group that gets journalism educators and journalism people from around the world together to talk about how to improve journalism education and basically prepare the journalists of the future to cover the world. So the syndicates is a way that we try to do research basically on site. You know, we get educators together from all different backgrounds, and we have them talk about an issue that interests them most. And then when they're done talking about it, we do reports on it and whatnot. And then this is the first time we know of a webinar has come out of one of the syndicates. We're excited about, and we hope more of this happens in the future. But in a nutshell, the WJEC syndicates, this is what they are, because some people get confused about them. But we just meet, everybody chooses one. We get a list, people decide from around the world what they think the most important topics of the day are in journalism education. And we choose, we come up with a handful of these topics, and then people get together and discuss them live at the conferences. So you're not just going to sessions and learning the most recent research and doing presentations, but you get to sit across the table from people from all over the world that are interested in exactly what you're doing and brainstorm of how to even do it better. So that's why I think a lot of people will run back and update their syllabus after that, which is great. But they're small theme discussion groups. They produce recommendations, again, to help improve journalism education. They encourage you to join theme sessions. We heard about that. What we do, point number 3 here, is ahead of time we get an expert scholar. We ask everybody what the most important 12 topics or so are, and then we find someone who's done a lot of research on this topic, and we basically call them the expert scholar and have them write a white paper, and then we share it with the group before the meeting begins, before the syndicates begin. So it doesn't just begin with a brainstorming session. We have the expert scholar there, and then we have a chair basically run the sessions and helping things move along, and people from all over the world sit in these small groups, and the expert scholar will give the highlights again of what was written up about it, and then everybody jumps in, and they have very focused questions that they're supposed to answer and come up with recommendations for the field, which we find very helpful. So it's not just a lot of discussion without any conclusion. We come up with 5 top conclusions of what they think we should do in the field. We post all this, we write about it, and people take it from there. We have rapporteurs, again, that summarize the findings, they write them up, and then we publish them. So let me show you some examples, and then if we have questions, you can ask me. Here's some examples from the syndicates at the New Zealand conference in WJEC4. So we would come up with some of the hottest topics. So here's one, teaching journalism for mobile platforms. All right, so then we come up with a question beforehand. So again, it's not just discussions and how you do it at your school, but we stay really focused. So the question for this How do journalism educators revise curricula to effectively prepare students for the reality of mobile technology while maintaining the fundamentals of journalism education? So the chair keeps people focused on that, and at the end we want the 5 recommendations. So there's a few examples. Here's teaching transmedia storytelling. You have the question there, how can we inspire and teach future journalists to effectively experiment with telling various parts of a story across multiple mediums and different platforms, and then everybody talks about it, and we keep going from there. Okay, I assume you can still see me here. They have a sign saying the reception's not very good. Can you guys still hear me?
We can.
Yeah.
You're just fading in and out a little bit, but you're good.
Okay. Fading out a little bit. Okay, what about now? Is it any better?
Yep. Yes, you're good.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to keep going here. So then here's another example, de-Westernizing journalism education in the era of new media genres, communication technologies. Again, we ask a question, everybody focuses on answering it. Now, for the initial responses to these questions of the 10 syndicates or whatnot, you could find them. It just came out, the autumn edition 2017 of ASJMC Insights. That's a big organization in America. You click on that, and it will show you some of the initial responses, the conclusions that we came to in these different syndicates, which hopefully you'll use it to inform your own research and your own teaching. You could also go to a WJEC net. They're going to be posted soon there. If you friend them, you'll know when the more in-depth syndicate reports get posted there. And you can also Facebook them and the whole deal, right, to find out more about that. Okay. So let's keep going. The next syndicate session is going to be in Paris. The next WJEC 5 is going to be there July 9th to the 12th in 2019. It looks like UNESCO is going to get very involved, which would be great. So if you'd like to get involved in syndicates, or if you have any questions, because I know this was very, very fast, you could get a hold of me. And again, I'm at Alfred University in upstate New York. It's at fgoodman@alfred.edu. You could ask me questions. You could see how you could get involved in these syndicates. We do need people that are the experts of the topic. We need chairs. We need rapporteurs of the reports and whatnot. For more information on the WJEC, the upcoming one, you could just go to wjec.paris/ and find out about that. And then quickly, I wanted to talk about some of the results from syndicates and doing this live research at WJEC. This is the first book that WJEC has basically done. It was a 10-year project. We're really proud of it. Of course, I'm especially biased because I'm an editor on it. So me and Alani Stein from University of Oklahoma. It's called Global Journalism Education, 21st Century, Challenges and Innovations. It was put out by the University of Texas at Austin, Journalism in the Americas, the Knight Center. So you can find out more about that. We have basically, you could get it on Amazon relatively cheaply. It's 493 pages, or you could download it free. If you just Google it, you could download it free. And the reason we did that, obviously, is we want people to have access all over the world to be able to take a look at it. So we're excited we were able to offer that option. They are now translating into Spanish, so we're really excited about that as well. But this has come from the syndicate work and just WJEC general that is trying to help move the field forward. And basically, you know, just quick and dirty, if you're interested in this book, if you want to check it out, please tell your friends about it and whatnot. We have some of the best scholars, I think you'll agree, in the field writing in this, and hopefully our next book we're going to get more of you guys engaged. It starts with these descriptive case studies highlighting journalism education practices around the world. Let me tell you what countries they're from. We've highlighted journalism education, past, present, and where it's going in the future, with the emphasis on challenges and innovation from Australia, Chile, China, Egypt, India, Israel, Russia, South Africa, United Kingdom, and the U.S. So we've done that. We also have the second section of the book deals with conceptual chapters, past, present, predicted future of global journalism education and its influence on the profession. We have people like Guy Berger and Joe Foote, Ian Richards, Charles Self, Felix Wow, and talking about where we're headed, talking about assessment, talking about if we're really going where we want to go as global journalism education and whatnot. And then the final part, I think is a unique contribution. We have people who are in the classroom right now doing really exciting, innovative work, and they write about it in the way that whether we're experts in these areas or not, we will be able to get something out of it. So they tell you exactly how they're innovating in the classroom, so you could emulate exactly what they're doing if you wish, or learn from it and do something different, or just know what's going on in the field, or if you want to write research on pedagogy and innovation. You can see some good examples here. So we have people like Mark Doiza talking about entrepreneurship and ways of being in the world. Then very practically, the pop-up newsrooms with Melissa Wall, Going Mojo, students covering severe weather, sports, and racial conflicts in Oklahoma. We have Julie Jones doing that. Awaja, I butchered her name, I'm sure, is talking about reality games and how you could use reality games to educate future journalism reporters, right? So that's very interesting. Coding the curriculum, how important it is to be coding. That's Cindy Royal, who's a real expert in that. And also we have Oscar Westland and Seth Lewis talking about reconsidering news production and how it's so important to understand the interplay of actors, actants, and audiences, and how they can improve journalism education. And then we conclude with what I think you would find interesting. So on top of those empirical case studies I was just about, there's a concluding chapter of 10 global journalism education predictions for the future, and then an epilogue talking about how we better start de-westernizing what we're doing, or give it a lot more effort to make sure that we're training journalists the best we can to do this journalism education in the future. And so let me see, I think that's what I have for you today. I think that's it. So we'll see if anybody has any questions, and I really appreciate being involved in this. And again, we're just thrilled at WJEC that the syndicates just keep bringing on more and more interesting activities and this webinar today. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, let me know, or you could email me in the future.
Hey, thank you, Robin. Does anyone have any questions? If you do, can you please raise your hand? Okay, Robin, it looks, oh, hang on, Simon Pipe. Simon Pipe has a question for you, Robin.
Okay.
Simon? Oh, Simon, we've lost your volume.
Hello,
there you go.
Have us now. I've called in Fred. When you started to talk about the book, I called in my colleague Fred, who runs our global journalism course. He's very excited.
Hi.
Hi, Robin.
Good. I'm glad. Thank you. Hi.
Hi, David. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for this. I just wanted to find out if this is a part of, is it a culmination of the UNESCO journalism curriculum, given that I think Guy Berger is involved in it? Is it something, a move from the UNESCO journalism curriculum?
No, it's not, but complement each other's work all the time. I don't know if you know, Guy Berger was the host of the WJEC in South Africa several years ago. Were you there?
Yes. Yes, I do know.
Right, so he inspired, right, so he's been involved in the WJEC from the very beginning. So a lot of times our work parallels each other, and of course we talk about the UNESCO work in the book, and we're hoping in Paris he's going to be very active in the WJEC. So what we're doing is very similar in many ways with what UNESCO is doing and what Guy Berger is doing.
Okay, thank you
So
very
we
much.
don't give the actual UNESCO curriculum in here, but we put it in context of what we're doing too. We do definitely talk about it, and Guy has a few chapters in the book.
All right, thank you.
You're more than welcome.
Fred.
Thanks.
Lovely to see you. Robin, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Again, thank you for getting up early this morning and joining us, and I know you're heading off to a meeting, so we'll let you go.
Okay, thank you so much. Good luck, guys. I'll try to drop in later.
All right, take care. Bye-bye. So next up, we have David Baines, who's a senior lecturer in journalism, and he's now joining us from Newcastle University in the north of England. And David is actually going to talk about our specific syndicate that we had in New Zealand, which is where this whole idea for this webinar came from. So, David, over to you.
Thank you very much. I don't have, I must apologise at the start, I haven't any PowerPoint slides after those two wonderful presentations. Really appreciate it. I'm going to be just doing a bit of talking here. The syndicate system, my first WJAC conference was in, the Congress was in Mechelen in Belgium in 2013. And the syndicate I was involved with then was on network journalism, which was emerging as a new topic at the time, and that informed a lot of the ways in which we taught journalism here after that, and engagements we'd had in other parts of the world. So we launched a pop-up newsroom project with, I say we launched, it was Melissa Wall in California had started off with her students, and we developed that into a global project where students around the world were reporting on particular topics over a couple of days, and it developed a network of global conversation, which was remarkable. This one was really interesting. I'm going to sort of take this back to front in a way. The people we had involved in the syndicate came from around the world. As Robin said, we had people from Namibia, from South Africa, from China, from, my screen's just gone blank, I'll look it up again, whoop, from China, from the United States and the UK, from various countries. And it was really interesting to hear the expertise and the understanding and the different perceptions that they all brought to the mix. And Robin's given a clear view of how the syndicates work. I'll start off with talking about the question again, and she had that on screen, but I'll go back to it. Then back to front, we were asked as a syndicate to produce 3 responses to the question, which would appear in the plenary session at the end of the conference. We produced 5 and then put 3 forward. Then I'll talk about, Robin mentioned that the syndicate is informed beforehand by a white paper from an expert who comes on. That informs the discussion, so we're not starting from a blank page. And I'll talk a little bit about what Daniel Brennan at Auckland University of Technology said in that presentation, which was a really excellent piece of work. Then a little bit about how we discussed about a discussion that grew out of that, and the conclusions we drew. And then we did something that wasn't asked of us as a syndicate, but after we'd heard from so many people and the discussions that were taking place, we asked our participants to put forward some examples of excellence in practice, of how they were working with mobile journalism and social media in their things. And one was, of course, from yourself, Anne. So I'll talk about those at the end there. And so the question we were faced with was, how do journalism educators revise curricula to effectively prepare students for the reality of mobile technology while maintaining the fundamentals of journalism education? There was mixing. How do we move forward? How do we manage change? How do we negotiate these changes that are taking place, and yet relate those changes to how to identify the fundamentals of journalism education? Are they universals, or are they changing too? And how do we connect these two together? So the 5 recommendations that we put forward to Congress was the first, that we embed mobile and social technologies throughout the curriculum rather than separate them into independent modules. I think one thing we started off with was the recognition that it wasn't simply mobile technologies, mobile platforms that we're dealing with. Social media, as we've heard already, is very much go together in this. They are interdependent, I think, there. So how do we embed them? And we said embed them throughout the curriculum. There's a tendency here to think in terms of practice. And I think one thing that all of us in that syndicate were looking at was how practice and theory go together, interdependent, are 2 sides of the same coin, if you like. And looking at how we embed these approaches, so it's not simply in the practice modules where we normally look for them, and where we as former journalists very often coming into the academy are invited to deal on these things, but how could we put these into place in the more academic, the more theoretical modules as well, where students are approaching theory from different perspectives, and again offers that opportunity to embed theory and practice in theory. It's sometimes, I think, we recognise that it can be a journey to bring some of our more traditional colleagues with us who are used to a standard essay or standard research dissertation. But there we go. There was also a focus on the second recommendation we put forward, was that we focus on more generic transferable skills and knowledge in content generation, curation, and collaboration. There's a risk here as well. I think there's a risk that Anthony's presentation showed they had avoided completely. There's the risk of looking at different platforms in terms of silos. So students are looking at a particular set of responses which work in Snapchat, another at Facebook, another for Twitter. I think what he demonstrated there was that you have to have students thinking right across the piece and understanding where one complements the other and where one has got advantages over the other in different ways. So that was recommendation number 2, that the generic transferable skills, a strong emphasis on things like storytelling rather than platform skills and knowledge to develop that cross-platform understanding. The third recommendation we put forward was an emphasis on critical thinking and ethical considerations in the use of mobile and social technologies. And we felt that sometimes these come further on down the line there, but we decided we recommend that they should be embedded right from the start. Sorry, I just lost my thread a moment. I'm putting forward the recommendation. We drew attention to the nature of mobile platforms and social media as new media in their own right. It's tempting to think of the mobile phone as simply something that can do lots of things we do already, but in one place, in one tool. And we were thinking that actually it does change the way we think we approach this. So what was important there was the adoption, a critically, ethically informed approach to its adoption. And that relied on, or had to rely on, we thought, on not only self-reflection, but peer feedback as well. And I'll come to another reason why that's important later, and that was informed by Danny Mulrennan's expert piece at the start. Mobile and social media are all such fast-moving technologies. There needs to be a continuing process of revision by the faculty and by students. I think it's tempting to take on the role and responsibility as a lecturer, as a teacher, of trying to manage all these processes alone or within the group or discussing it among yourselves. But what was important there was that the students had a large voice that needed to be heard in what they were looking forward, in what they were seeking from this, and in bringing their expertise to the field. Yes, there might not be, although they might use these platforms in their own daily lives, they might not be using them until they come to us, not be asked to use them in a professional way. So there's that professional approach, but then they have understandings which we need to consider. And recognise as well, the fifth recommendation was that we recognise the historical, local and global contexts that have influenced and will continue to drive emerging mobile technologies. When change has taken place, it's not simply a new technology that has come about. There are ways in which that technology has emerged from social needs and ways in which society is using those technologies that are important. And understanding the processes, dynamics and outcomes of those disruptions that have taken place in the past will also help the students to be able to understand in years to come how the changes and transformations are taking place in their lives as they develop and negotiate their careers. I think it's important to be thinking about our students as and helping them to become autonomous learners. That's a given, I think. But one thing we're doing is equipping them not simply with a set of skills they can take beyond and say, okay, now I know how to do this, but it's how to negotiate and navigate and understand those processes of change that are coming in the years to come, that are going to be emerging in the years to come, and how they are going to be able to develop and to assess them. So understanding not simply what the changes are, but what's driving those changes and how to respond to them is critically important. And it goes back again, I think, to that point about practice and theory being two sides of the same coin. The discussion we had was it came it was initiated by Danny's white paper, and I'll highlight some of the key points that she brought to the table that initiated our considerations of this question. So in the face of the extensive disruptions that have taken place and were continuing in the media ecology in general and in journalism in particular, she said, her colleagues at AUT had just established a community of practice to explore and implement curricular and pedagogical development. So regularly they had meetings where they gathered together and they looked at what changes were taking place. They looked at what they were doing well. I think this is probably part of what we all do in all our universities, and we have the regular thing at the end of the year when we have our external examiners come along and look it over as well, and we have that discussion. But this was conscientiously looking at changes. And this recognised not just the technological developments which were impacting media workflows and practices, but the change in political economy of the journalism industries, and in particular, the recent collaborative turn in organisational and structural levels within the field. Alongside new media models, they were demanding new and often entrepreneurial ways of working, collaborating, and convergences were taking place between erstwhile competitors. And this is something new that has come about, and we've noticed it here in Britain, as well as Danny is talking there. The BBC recently has been working with local newspapers, and there's the I've just lost the name of it, the Local Democracy Reporters Project, where the BBC is putting £8 million into placing 150 working journalists in local newspapers and such organisations around Britain. Once upon a time, that would not have happened. The BBC putting reporters into local newspapers, and there is their responsibility. They have a specific brief to report on issues that concern local democracy. So it might be local government, it might be the National Health Service. It's about holding power to account. And the BBC is also putting other resources available, making other resources available to commercial organisations, local newspapers, and the like. They're also working with, and local newspapers are working increasingly with, community radio stations and hyperlocal news organisations in some places. So these organisations in the past would not have worked together are now collaborating. I think that's part of the understanding of the environment in which our students are working, and how mobile and social media is going to be playing out across those different platforms and sectors. Again, I relate back to what Danny was saying about developing autonomous learners equipped to accommodate the constant change in their career in the field of journalism that they are entering, and that, she said, had developed in their institution a pedagogical shift towards student-centred and student-directed learning, which again equips the students to develop capabilities that are not only applicable in familiar situations, but also in novel situations to accommodate those changes. I think it's one of the issues we have there is the relationship between the academy and industry. And when it comes to accreditation, there can be a tendency for the accrediting bodies. In this country, it's the National Council for the Training of Journalists and the BJTC, the Broadcast Journalism Training Council. Their approaches are often informed by a particular section of what we might call the journalism industries, and they are looking for our students to come and join them with a set of skills and knowledge and understandings which they will find useful from day one. So it's about meeting their needs rather than perhaps, and that grows out of what they are familiar with. So they want students who can do what they are doing now. And I think one of the things that we're working with when we're looking at mobile and social media is that ability to experiment, to explore new ways of doing things, and to look at what we might be doing in the future rather than simply being good at what we're doing now, and to find out how to do those kind of things. So the syndicate discussion addressed, as I say, both mobile and social media. We decided that we shouldn't just be talking about mobile media, it was too narrow. Social media was very much part of it, and that's emerged in the presentations we've seen today. They're interrelated, interdependent, and that informs curricular development and again the identification of fundamentals in journalism education, how these might be maintained. So going back to back to that question we're addressing in the first place. Syndicate members recounted the ways in which they had introduced mobile journalism into their programs. And we found these reflecting what Anthony was talking about in the first place. In the first instance, what emerged from the conversations was that people saw it in such way, in perhaps as what we call a Swiss Army knife, journalism's Swiss Army knife as a tool. It brought together still image, the ability to produce still images, to produce moving images, text, and such, like in a single network device, and allowed the capture, creation, and distribution of audio, visual, alphanumeric text individually or in combination. So it was that approach of it, that seeing it as a tool, and the way that we learn to use a tool is to use it to do stuff with. So it was actually going out there and doing stuff with it. As a method of distribution, but not simply distribution, but also as of engagement, and again that emerged through the way the students are learning at Ithaca, which was fascinating to see. But what was happening there was allow the journalists to explore new ways of working, and significantly, I think what we talked about was the new relationship with our audiences, and there's a difficulty about using the word audiences in the way, in sort of co-producers. I know this is, but it's about, it relates again to that networked notion where not simply news consumers, but co-producers, co-distributors, co-analysts in many ways. And the third way we saw the mobile and social platforms was we needed to look at it and consider it as a new medium in its own right. So it wasn't simply a Swiss Army knife that brings together lots of different things we have in a nice compact thing in your pocket. It's also doing something new, something different. So its locational aspects, through its interactive capacities, and a means of mass selective communication, which is a conduit not only to the public sphere, but to the private spheres as well, and how these are sometimes conflated, and sometimes the boundaries between them are eroded, which then leads to other considerations that maybe haven't been the subject of our curricula beforehand. So the first conclusions we drew were that students should be immersed in mobile media from the very beginning of their programme of study. So it shouldn't just be something that is a module, a particular training thing. It should permeate their study and come right from the day one when they arrive, as well as alongside traditional tools such as video cameras, audio recorders, and PCs. And that touched upon the importance that's sometimes lost of getting high audio quality. So if you're working with microphones and normal broadcasting technologies, recognizing that what you need to do to achieve that, and also recording video in a coherent manner, those add-ons to the iPads which the students at Ithaca are using were really useful, because what they were doing were replicating in a way the importance of understanding the grammar of the medium.
David, you only have about 2 more minutes. Oh
dear, sorry, I've just talking too much. Right, I'll say it, and then it followed from that. Mobile technologies also need to be embedded across the curriculum. We focused particularly, then I'll raise this, on ethical and legal concerns needed to be addressed. Sometimes we leave that to the second year, and we felt that because the mobile and social platforms were looking at cutting across those public and private spheres, that is something we needed to bring to the front. So the programme needed to focus attention on those emerging issues concerning those technologies, relating to, but not confined to, privacy, to content ownership, to sharing content and whose content, to representations, verification, authentication, community engagement, and independence. So the students need to develop awareness of their own web and their own presence, and that reflexivity there, and relate that to their professional life, if you like. And critically important was for us to be able to provide students with a safe space in which they could experiment and explore this as a new medium with new rules. And I think one thing that came out of it is the difficult bit isn't using the tool as the mobile and social platforms to do what we've done before. It's exploring how things are different and how they're bringing new opportunities, as well as, excuse us, new opportunities, as well as understanding what those changes are going to be. Does that give me another minute to talk very briefly about best practice, or would you like me to stop there?
Go ahead. No, go ahead. 1 more minute.
Right. Well, thank you very, very much to all those people who took part. So I'll do it very briefly. Mark Neusel of the New Zealand, I think got it right, University of St. Thomas in the USA, worked with his students and put them together with science students to do projects using mobile and social media to explore environmental issues. Very often we don't have that scientific understanding in the students that come to us, or in colleagues in practice and in learning in this case. So that using it to explore those issues, the scientific issues were important. Working well in the moment, Deb Wenger of the University of Mississippi, she prepared her students over a week or two, and then had them working in a very intense couple of hours to report live on particular topics with students out in the field, relating to students in the control room, if you like, so using mobile and social media to do live coverage on a particular project. Sequencing, narrative, and planning and edit. Ped Achterman of Central Pacific University in the USA talked about how you can sometimes lose track of telling a story, of providing a narrative, of making something coherent, and making complexity, helping us to understand complexity through the way in which we present and edit the text. So it's going back in some ways to those sort of classic competencies in terms of video reporting. And there was the complete package where you've got the magazine you put together, and a lot of that students have to go and find their own way through to discover things. So giving them the project, that creative project, and saying, right, you're going to learn through, use this project to develop and learn all these different things that you need to learn, different platforms, different media across there. And finally, I'll let you talk more about that later, perhaps, if you. I think it was a cracking good example. Finally, there was Daniel Brennan at Auckland Technical University, talked about verification exercises. And that came out of a research project she and colleagues had done there with practitioners, with journalists. And she found that very often they didn't know how to authenticate and validate the sources they were using on social and mobile platforms and the stuff they were gathering. And so they produced a really useful guide to doing that she worked with her students. And thanks to all of those people who offered those examples of best practice, we've loaded them onto the HEA, Association for Journalism Education here in the UK. We've loaded it onto the website there. So if you go onto that website, there's an example there with much more detail on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions for David? If you'd like to raise your hand down in the bottom of your screen. Okay, David, no questions. You looked out. Oh, no, hang on. Amanda Gearing. Amanda,
hello.
Would you like to ask a question?
Thank you very much, David. I was wanting to know whether there is a recognised way in which people who teach journalism actually collect information from leading journalists working in the field.
A recognised way. Sorry. Yeah. I think so. Lots of different ways. I think here at Newcastle, I think colleagues everywhere maintain those contacts with people in the field to find out what's going on and what's changing there. But I think we're also keeping a watch on who's doing something new, who's doing something interesting, and can we ask them to come along and work with our students, maybe on a workshop for a couple of an afternoon, or to give a guest lecture. And I think just generally keeping in contact with our networks. I'm very fortunate in that I've long been an activist in the NUJ, the National Union of Journalists here, and I go to conferences, and we've got the Newcastle branch. So I'm acting chair of the Newcastle branch. We've got 300 something members in this region, and we're in contact quite regularly, as well as what's happening in the. So I think as many ways as you can, really, to maintain those contacts and keep finding out what's happening.
Okay.
Right.
Thank
okay. So you do surveys or in-depth interviews and things with practicing journalists to find out what's happening.
When I'm doing a research project on something particular, yes, we'll do that and say that's a research approach. But I think it's in many ways more loose than that. I mean, just sort of keeping those networks up and running, keeping in touch with people, going for a coffee or a pint of beer with them, and chatting. But I think you put your finger on something really interesting there, because one thing, things are changing so quickly. There's often, and I talked about accreditation things, which is quite formal structures. It tends to be a view that we are preparing our students to go in to meet the needs of a particular industry, and I think a particular industry is it's less defined than that. Our students are going to go into it, all sorts of organisations and companies and such like, and apply their knowledge and skills in that way. And I think also it's up to us as universities to offer our students the opportunities to experiment, to play, to find out and to try and find out new things, because that's going to be of value to the professional journalism field, if you like. We are a place where we can experiment and do interesting things. Sometimes we'll fail, sometimes we'll discover new things, and that will inform how they work. It's not simply us learning from them what they want and they demand of our students. I think that's an important issue. It's something we all do together, and that sense of collaboration that I touched upon with different organisations. I think that's emerging there, where universities and journalism organisations are working together to try and understand what's happening in the world around us in journalism.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, David. Much appreciated for spending your time with us this afternoon, rather. Next up, we have Lisa Ruhama, who is a Senior Practice Fellow in News Journalism from Bournemouth University. And Lisa is going to talk to us about an experiential learning project that has been running here at Bournemouth. So over to you, Lisa.
Hi everyone. Hopefully this very quick discussion will illuminate some of the themes that have come up in terms of the challenges of teaching journalism, social, mobile, and how we embed it into the curriculum. I talk as a former programme leader of our undergraduate programme, which is called Multimedia Journalism, and of course that multimedia peg already irks me and has done for several years, and no doubt many of you can identify with the branding of journalism courses, and also some of the strictures around designing the curriculum, which again I think David touched on our accreditation bodies. We have all three. That also is another challenge. So I'm going to talk to you briefly alongside Anne about a news-led project led by our students called US Vote 16, which was their news coverage of the US election. But I'm going to start off with the notion that I felt very much as a practitioner starting here and learning how to teach journalism, and that's still an ongoing process, about how artificial the feeling is of teaching journalism in the classroom, and what we can do as educators to bring journalism alive, to give our next generation of journalists who are going to be using these technologies that feeling of professional identity, to be able to tell stories and not have the constrictions of the universities, that how they put that on us in terms of the curricula. I think also just turn on the head the idea that the technology also is something that straitjackets our students in terms of placing them in the classroom or at home or on their own. I think we have to get away from that idea as well, which I often hear spoken about, that now young journalists, they're all on their mobile phones. It's a very individual, very living in a bubble sort of world. So in terms of really thinking about how we teach journalism effectively, the US Vote 16 project was led by our our journalism students here at Bournemouth University, but was also faculty-wide. It was a collaborative project with other students from TV production to PR to marketing, and to our BA Communication and Media students as well. What we did was we allowed students, and this is where the risk came in, was we allowed them to set up this news project to tell the story of the US election and to use all kinds of media, including Snapchat and social media. So inevitably that brought in a lot of challenges for us as a teaching team. Were we there to help them with the organisation? Were we there to shadow them? Were we there to teach them, as we did this 24-hour round-the-clock teaching learning exercise? So initially our thoughts were, and these will be in a paper that Anne and I are currently putting together, our initial thoughts were that we should have a rather hands-off approach and let some of our third years start this project, lead it and organise it. Essentially the whole point of this was the student experience, learning, developing a professional identity, showing to us how they want to tell a story rather than us setting the angle or the agenda. We wanted to allow them to have the freedom without us telling them what to do or how to do it. We also made sure that there were many of us around, I might add, on duty as what we call duty news editors, just in case there were any issues around legal compliance, copyright, all of that kind of thing. And we were also there if we saw anything, particularly as we know in broadcast journalism, if things got sticky and we needed some information to fill, that our social media team would also be able to help students. So we were there to, in effect, shadow and help rather than intervene. So our approach wasn't interventionist during the night. So it's very much what Bruno would call a self-discovery approach, and not without its risks. So actually, we surveyed the students to find out what they thought of it. And within that survey, what were the key themes in terms of professionalism and employability? What did they get out of it? Skills and knowledge that they accrued. Did they have enough skills and knowledge? Did they feel they were equipped to take on these editorial leadership roles? Did they feel good in front of the camera? Were they able to be agile enough to respond to breaking news as it became apparent that Trump was going to win? Communication. How did they communicate amongst themselves? Interpersonal skills, leadership skills, using social media. How did they report it using social media? And their general organisational skills as well. We've looked at that survey and there are some preliminary, rather interesting findings. Now, you imagine that you possibly know, having experienced this as educators through the night, what they might say. But there are several interesting findings. We'll keep all of those for the final paper, obviously, folks. But one of them was the sense of community that they felt, the positive sense of community, of teamwork, which, let's face it, in journalism is what it's all about at the end of the day. You know, there's very much the lone wolf idea, and the person who doesn't collaborate, the independent journalist, the reporter, how I was taught, go out, get that story, Lisa, come back to the office and write it. That doesn't fit anymore with the identity of journalism, thank goodness, because we work in a much more collaborative way across all kinds of platforms, media, but also with people out there on social media, citizens who want to contribute and collaborate and work with us. So that was a good thing. The students felt that they were coming together and had a sense of identity. They enjoyed the community aspect of the teaching and learning, getting to know each other, having those interesting discussions, having those tricky discussions, perhaps arguing a point, how to get things done on a night and a radio running order. I might add we had live radio broadcasts throughout the night, running live on the website. We had a website, we had social media, and we had video broadcasts. We were interviewing people in the States. If you're thinking, gosh, this is strange, doing a US election coverage from a seaside resort in Bournemouth. We collaborated with American colleagues, teachers, and students in American universities. So that sense of community identity, collaboration, and teamwork, really interesting, positive output from the night. Secondly, one of the things that were challenging, and challenging for us in terms of teaching pedagogy, was a finding that many of them actually wanted us as teachers to be more interventionist, i.e. help them more. We really felt that actually we were giving them freedom. They felt that perhaps our role was to help them a lot more through the night. Now that is a real challenge for us. You know, when do you get stuck in, and when do you stand back and let them just learn from things that go wrong? Because as we know, things do go wrong in journalism, and actually teaching journalism is often from a set presets and challenges, and we set them a story and all of that kind of thing when they start out. And having that agility and resilience is really important. So those are key challenges. One of the things that was really interesting too is how they do use social media. Of course they use social media, but as Anthony really ideally pointed out, and I will certainly look at a lot of his stuff on his PowerPoint, is how do we teach them to use social media in terms of journalistic context rather than their own individual way of using it. I think that truly does need to be embedded in the curriculum. And before I hand over to Anne, who might talk about the mobile social media aspect a little bit more, and what she observed on the night, because we were both duty editors on the night, I would say that I myself, as somebody who's just ended my time as programme leader of a course and coming in from industry, is that I think universities as a whole need to be a lot more agile about their curricula, full stop. And minor modifications and every 5 years a review of a degree is not fit for purpose, in my opinion. I think that we as educators and academics need to be given a lot more support in being able to respond more actively and intelligently to what's going on, and make our courses much more respondent and agile to the changes in journalism and everything that's happening out there in industry, as well as the world. So that's why we set up this experiential project. It was our break-free moment from the curriculum, and students didn't have to do an assignment. Now, again, that's another question and a challenge. If we set up something like this, which is a big project, should it be embedded in the curriculum, and should it be an assignment, and should it be assessed? Most students would probably say no, but it's just definitely open to question and debate. And on that note, I'll hand over to Dr. Luce.
Thanks, Lisa. I don't really have much to, to add on to what Lisa just said, but we have a bit of a reputation now at Bournemouth for carrying out these types of experiential learning projects. We started in 2012 with US 2012. We've covered the Indian elections. We've covered Aftershock Nepal, which was sending students to Nepal to cover, the Nepali earthquake. We've done the British elections in 2015. We didn't do them last year because it was, the students had pretty much left, or were all in exam period, and it was just way too much for them and us. And then we did US 2016. So we've written about this before in journalism education, and this project that Lisa and I are working on, we're really reflecting on what we've learned, since our first project in 2012. And it's interesting, as Lisa said, the key thing that's coming out of it is that they wanted more hand-holding, and they loved the sense of community. And that was very different to where we were in 2012. So with the changing dimensions of higher education in the UK, I think it's probably something else that we need to be aware of. So Does anyone have any questions for Lisa about what we've just spoken about? If you do, please raise your hand. Oh, Sally Ann Duncan?
Hi, Lisa. Hi, Anne. Thanks very much for that. That was really fascinating. I would love to do more of these projects. I think they're really great learning experiences for the students. But I have two questions really for you, if I may. The first one is, have you any tips for doing these sort of collaborative sessions when you have an incredibly small team of 3? And a lot of undergrad students who are doing joint honours, so they're not getting the full amount of journalism that a journalism undergrad would get. And the other question I have is, how did the university react to your innovative approach? Obviously, you were giving up your own time to do this, so you would have been doing this for free. Once they learn that you do that kind of thing, do they expect you to do it as a norm? Or were they supportive? Yeah, I'd just like to get some feedback on how the university felt about it.
Okay, the first question, yes, I completely identify with what you're saying. We're very lucky in that we have this huge faculty of media and communication, so we have many staff on hand. I think actually, if you want an experiential project, I think you will have to be, because of the constraints on you, a lot more interventionist and perhaps go smaller but more focused. And actually that in itself might mean that you can have better quality. You know, if you go smaller, focused and local, then you perhaps can decide with your students as a collaborative project the story that they're interested in. That is key. They've got to be engaged with it. And then decide whether or not, the other key thing is decide on the story that's important but perhaps locally focused. I'm thinking in practical terms. What angle are they going to go on? The students themselves, get them to set the agenda on it, rather than, we were very keen for our students not to follow the BBC's coverage or even to ape the BBC's coverage, but to do it themselves. It could be youthful, it could be dynamic. We said, you know, you can innovate, you can experiment. Things may go wrong. It's absolutely fine. We're going live. You're our students. You're the future. You know, in terms of journalism innovation, nobody ever innovated and didn't make a mistake, you know, along the way. We said you can, you know, if you like Vice and their ways of doing treatments, do that kind of thing if you want to. Second part of the question is the risk, which is essentially, will a university wear it? Now, Bournemouth University, what was once called the Media School, is now the Faculty of Media and Communication, has got a very good reputation for innovation and having enough independence and buy-in that we are confident enough to do these sort of projects, and that is led from the tops. And it's also, I have to say, down to individual lecturers, Anne and the team of journalism lecturers. Let's blow our own trumpet.
Why not?
Let's go for it, big style. We felt there was the need for this. And we're all ex-practitioners who've worked round the clock, done 24-hour shifts. Yes, we kind of thought, do we really want to do this to ourselves in the middle of assignments and marking and everything? And essentially, it was all by goodwill. Something that's diminishing possibly in HE, as we're all got bigger workloads. But without the goodwill of the staff and the buy-in of students, a project like this could never work.
Yeah. And I think, you know, we do space them out as well, because we do the work in the lead up to them and we're all excited. And by the time we're, you know, the 24-hour cycle, we're all going, God, I'm a lot older than I used to be. You know, it's about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and go, oh God, the body's really feeling that. You know, and then after you finish it the next morning, the students are high as a kite because they've just done this amazing thing, and we're all going, where are our beds? You know, except for the unfortunate colleagues who have the 9 a.m. lecture, you know. So we space them out, and we it's kind of, I guess it's kind of what the equivalent would be, I guess, of many women saying when they have their first child, you kind of forget the pain of childbirth until you have the next one. And that's kind of how we roll with these projects. But it is very much based on goodwill. But we also do believe that the students are getting something out of it. And it's, you know, and it does, because we have the 3 accreditations as well. And as David alluded to as well, you know, we're dealing with accrediting bodies that are putting demands on us that perhaps are not letting us be as innovative and creative as we perhaps want to be. So we're having to find other areas within our curriculum to allow that to flourish and allow it to happen. And thankfully we have, you know, as Lisa said, from the top down in our faculty, at least we have the support to be able to do that. So, you know, losing a couple nights sleep every year and a half, 2 years, we're willing to do it because it does end up being a great experience for the students. And most of them come back and say it was the experience of a lifetime, made their university career. So well worth doing. Yeah, I think we would say that, wouldn't you? Yeah. Okay. So any other questions for us before I move on? Oh, David, yes.
Just not so much a question, just to say a heartfelt thank you to Lisa for saying that. The point about the universities needing to be more light on their feet when it comes to putting in places our curricula and allowing us to make them more flexible. Yes, and we've had to do the same thing that you've been doing, is of the experiential projects. We do a couple each year, and we've been doing them at weekends sometimes because they're the only time you can get the students not locked into a timetable where you can say, okay, involved in this, and it does take a lot of buy-in from the students. But what it does is allow the better students, the most enthusiastic students, to come forward. It's voluntary; they don't get grades, and they're going to take more advantage of it, and they're going to learn more from it, and that's satisfying, I think, for all of us.
Fabulous, thank you. Right, well, I am going to be moving. I'm going to be taking the next little section. If I can figure out how to get this to work. But okay, so I'm a principal academic in journalism and communication at Bournemouth University, and I thought what we would do is, before we go into the last section, before we break out and have some chit-chat, is kind of just take stock of where we are right now as a field. And I just wanted to do this before I start talking about Snapchat and Padlet, just to provide some context. Now, most of the information will probably not be new to you, but I do think it's important to contextualize the field so we have an indication of what we need to be teaching or what we need to be considering that we need to teach. So I'm an active reader of the Reuters digital news report and also Nick Newman's Journalism, Media and Technology Trends and Predictions annual report. They're high on my annual reading lists. So I just thought I would provide an overview for you in case you haven't had an opportunity to read those 2 reports about, you know, where they're saying our field is. So according to the digital news report, younger people are getting their news online and via social media. Don't think there's any surprises there. Older people, age 55 plus, as you can see from this slide, are actually still getting their news from television. Mobile news notifications have grown significantly in the last year and are outstripping computer access for news in an increasing number of countries. Smartphones are now as important for news outside of the home as much as inside. 46% of smartphone users now access news in bed, and 32% of us are accessing news in the toilet. So just want to put that out there. Sorry, I've lost my slides. There is growth in messaging apps, and it comes as an extra layer on top of social networking rather than as a replacement. So according to the Reuters digital news report, 80% of people are touching a Facebook product weekly for any purpose. So remember, Facebook owns WhatsApp and Messenger, the 2 most popular messaging apps around the world, along with Instagram, which has been incorporating many of Snapchat's most popular features lately. When it comes to consuming video, most video content is short, as we know. On every platform, around half of users don't consume any online news video in a given week. Only a minority of video is being consumed on news websites. Jumping ahead. Nick Newman's predictions for the last several years have been an interesting read. 2 years ago, he wondered whether Snapchat was viable. Last year, he stated that it was a contender, and this year, it's such a staple, like Facebook, that it actually didn't really get any mentions in his predictions. In 2016, the Reuters prediction report told us that live news, such as Facebook Live, Instagram Story, Periscope, and Snapchat, were all the things to watch. There were new ethical considerations that we needed to be thinking about, and they said they would emerge, and they did. So Facebook showed its first live murder. There was a live robbery. We saw suicide happen, and also ISIS propaganda. But this year, the prediction report actually moves on from this. It's now time for augmented reality and virtual reality in journalism to take center stage. So we've started to see this with The Guardian's 6x9. It's their virtual reality studio, and 6x9 is a first-person storytelling where you are an inmate in solitary confinement. Charities here in the UK who are looking to drive empathy and public information are also getting on the virtual reality bus. The UK's National Autistic Society, for instance, made a virtual reality film to show people what it's like to live with autism. The Alzheimer's Research Organization here in the UK as well put audiences in the shoes of someone with dementia. The New York Times has also made some significant progress with virtual reality, and they talk about it as a powerful way to create empathy. So these are kind of the predictions for this year, and that appears to be where we're heading. I know we're talking about it here in our faculty, but if any of you are like me, you're still trying to get your head around Snapchat and actually how to use it in your classroom, let alone thinking about Oculus Rifts and virtual reality. So I thought what I would do is I would talk to you about how I use Snapchat as an assessment in my classroom. It was when I was at WJEC in New Zealand last summer of 2016 that everyone was talking about Snapchat, and I felt like, oops, this is probably something that I've fallen behind on, and I need to get on board with this new platform. Now, I'm a believer in teaching the foundations of journalism in an innovative way, not teaching the platform, well, because, you know, it could be gone next week. I mean, does anyone remember Vine? And to be honest, Snapchat could be gone this time next year too, especially if its $443 million losses in the last 3 months actually continue. But this past academic year, I decided to tackle Snapchat, but first I had to learn how to use it, and I had to involve my partner in this process because Snapchat is a very interactive app. So every time we went out together, I started snapping, made him very cross at times, but my perfect example was we visited a local castle and I snapped the entire day. We were gone for a Sunday, we were out for about 8 hours, and at the end of it I had a 10-minute video to reflect our day, which we had a great giggle at. Not all of it was brilliant, in fact most of it was pretty crappy, but it did reflect on how the day went. So what I learned, or what I thought while I was doing this, was that it would be really great to help students develop a narrative, to help them create a sequence, to get them thinking in pictures, to get them thinking about text and captions, to get them thinking about sound. And it actually ended up working for what it was that we were trying to accomplish. So I was teaching Snapchat to our first-year students who were taking Features in Online 1. It was a second semester class. In this class, I'm tasked with teach them how to write features, how to build a website, how to use InDesign, how to make a digital magazine, how to blog, how to integrate video using Adobe Spark, and now it was going to be Snapchat. So there was a lot that has to be accomplished in this particular unit. Now, the students, when they come to me, have no video, mobile journalism, or broadcast experience. In fact, they're taking a 5-year or 5-week intensive teaching course at the same time as they're teaching my 12-week features and online. So they had no previous experience. They also had no feature writing experience. So these guys were coming to me quite in a blank environment. So for me, using Snapchat was a way to get them to start engaging in a vertical world, because I knew they were learning how to operate in a horizontal world for TV journalism. But we also know now that online in social media that, video is turning vertical, and we need to prepare our students for that. It was also a way for the students to start thinking about how do you use video to enhance a written story. And so that's really what I had them working on. They had to write a feature story, and then they had to come up with a Snapchat video to accompany it, to give it a little bit of extra added value, as we like to call it. Because I was also trying to teach them how to work together to create a final digital magazine as well. So the digital magazine, I know digital magazines are kind of the thing of the past, but it's really about getting them to think about how to integrate story, video, social media all together in one big magazine that's digital, if that makes sense. And this does set them up to be able to create interactive documentaries and interactive features in their second year. So what they ended up having to do was to think about the narrative flow in relation to video and audio as well. So if they had a lead story and it has a Snapchat video, do we want to lead with video again in the next story, or do we try and focus on something else? Now, because they were publishing their stories on their own websites as part of their own portfolio of work, they also had to think about where best to place their Snapchat video. Now, the one thing we didn't think about, and I say this is probably as much my fault as theirs, is that we didn't think about where to host their video. Going forward, I would say it would have to be embedded within the website, but they all went onto YouTube, an obvious choice to host their videos, and then embedded the YouTube site into their websites. Now, what ended up happening was this. We had vertical videos in a horizontal hosting platform. And as you can see, it's probably not the best with the black on either side. So it was it's not the prettiest thing, shall we say. So we saw things like that. Now, overall, it was a good experience. We did have to teach a few of them how to use Snapchat, and a few of them actually resented the fact that I had them download an app that they didn't necessarily want on their phone. However, 2 of them went on placement at magazines this past summer and messaged me while I happened to be in Chicago at the AEJMC conference, and told me that their editors had asked them to come up with Snapchat videos to accompany stories that the magazine was writing. And they felt, they were very happy, shall we say, with the fact that they felt prepared and that they were able to actually do this. So it was even though they were only second years or going into their second year, they had already had experience with something that industry was in need of. The other thing I just wanted to talk about really quickly is that I use Padlet.com or Padlet in my features class as well. Now, Padlet is an online site. You can go in and create a board, and what I ended up using it for was to teach features intros. Now, I've been teaching how to write intros for the better part of the last 10 years, and for whatever reason, with this particular class, this cohort of students, for 3 weeks, I tried true and tested methods of how to write an intro, but they just didn't work. So I was tearing my hair out, and I thought, I have to try something new. A colleague mentioned to me this online thing called Padlet. I went online and said, oh, okay, well, let me give this a go. So what I did was I brought all 100 students together in a lecture theater and gave them a handout. And it had a lot of information. It was really a paragraph around dogs needing homes to be adopted into. And what they had to do was the students had to write descriptive, narrative, and statement of fact intros. Now, what ended up happening, I'm just going to show you the next slide. This is Padlet, and this is a video, so when you get access to the actual PowerPoint, you'll be able to watch this video. But this is Padlet. You can go online and create it's what they call a blackboard, really. And it works in real time. And the students actually write up their intros, and this is constantly moving. Now, the students had a bit of an issue because once they saw that you could upload video and pictures and that it moved, they got very excited. This is one of my students who decided to take a selfie. Snoop Dogg ended up on the Padlet wall as well. Parties were advertised. You know, they were, in general, they were being quite naughty, shall we say. But I let that go while they were writing the intros because it was clear they were actually working. But when they realized that it would move, they really enjoyed that, because when I went in then to edit in real time and show them how this actually, you know, what they needed to do better, they started messing with me. So someone else would just go on and type hello, and the whole thing would move, and then I would lose it and I couldn't find it. And so I ended up getting quite cross. And once I gave them my sternest, you know, stop messing with me, people, or else, they stopped. And actually what ended up happening was they loved it. They actually found it to be an intense learning and teaching experience, but the feedback from it was the best session they had had all semester. They felt that they had learned more. They felt that because I was able to speak to them almost one-to-one, the posts were anonymous. So no, you know, I was working and fixing an intro that either had a fact error or that was missing information, or, you know, the comma was in the wrong place, you know, actually giving them this one-to-one attention, but it was anonymous. So the students actually loved it. So when you get these PowerPoint slides, you can actually go on there and you can see the Padlet itself. And I ended up Snapchatting this as a video, you know, kind of integrating Snapchat into the unit again. But I would highly recommend Padlet for anyone who might be looking to try and, you know, teach something, you know, or change their teaching in some way. It's a really, really exciting program that you can use. So, does anyone have any questions for me? Oh, I thought I was going to escape. David?
A room of 100 students. I think we do this almost one-to-one with them.
I'm sorry, David, I couldn't hear you.
Sorry, you said you did this with a room of 100 students. So it's almost one-to-one intro tuition with a room that size. Excellent.
Yeah. Yeah, it was fabulous because yeah, they all had the handout in front of them and they all saw the screen, and they all knew what intros they had written, but I didn't know who it was. So this could have been my star journalism student in the first year who I was critiquing and saying, well, this intro actually is not very good. And this person needs to pay more attention to facts and the 5 W's and, you know, where's the narrative here? Where's the description? You know, so I was able to do that, but the students were able to ask me questions as well. And they felt, you know, they felt safe enough to do that. So as I was critiquing someone's, you know, they'd say, well, why did you take that comma out of there? You know, and I'd be able to say, well, because it doesn't go there. It doesn't read the sentence out loud. Or someone putting in a fact error, you know, saying that, you know, this particular dog killed people. And it's like, well, actually, where on your sheet does it say that that dog kills people? And it's like, oh, no, it said allegedly kills people, you know. And so it's, you know, and so I was able to teach them, you know, the importance of the minutia. And they all felt that it was, because it was their work and they knew whose work it was, but I didn't, there was something about that they really enjoyed. And I have to say, for me too, after I yelled at them and told them to stop messing with me, because that was, and it was one of these things that I was pulling my hair out for 3 weeks, wasn't getting anywhere. Their stories weren't moving any further. Their writing wasn't progressing. And I'm going, oh my God, how am I going to do this? How do I get them to actually get to where I need them to be? And one colleague, it was literally, have you tried this? I said, no. And I walked in cold turkey to a classroom and said, right, we're doing this today. So it was really kind of on a whim, but now I've integrated it into every class that I'm teaching, and I use it for various different things. It's great for teaching punctuation of quotes, because you can actually have them write, take quotes and punctuate them, and then you can show them, no, the comma does not go there. The full stop does not go inside the quote marks. Those types of things, it's really quite handy for.
Are they loading the intros up off from their phones in the class, or did they do it beforehand, or?
No, they did it in class. We did it all in class. So I had an hour lecture. I gave them the handout. They had 15 minutes to write up 3 different intros, and then I took the remaining time in class to do the teaching and critiquing and editing. So, yeah. Amanda.
I was just wanting to find out whether you can use the Padlet remotely as well as in the same room.
Oh, yes, you can. So I could set up a Padlet for this webinar, for instance, and give you all as long as you have the web link, you can put up different topics and ask people to answer them. And yeah, as long as you have access to the internet, you can do it as remotely as you need to.
Excellent.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, so our final speaker this afternoon, before we break into some sessions, is Ji Hoon Hyo. Ji, have I said that correctly? Oh, I don't think. Ji, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Hi, welcome to the webinar. I know you were running from teaching and everything this afternoon, or this morning for you. So G is an instructional professor at the University of Mississippi, and he's going to share with us some information about his video journalism and the apps that he's using in his teaching. So G, did you need to share any files or a PowerPoint or anything?
Do you have, can I share a PowerPoint?
You can. So if you need to share a PowerPoint, the best thing you can do is down on the bottom of your screen, if you see the purple tab, and it'll be chat, some people, the participants, and then there's a square with an arrow.
Yep, I see it.
If you click on that and then go to share files, you can drag and drop your PowerPoint in there.
Wonderful.
And then once it's loaded, you can just click share now. It'll be a black button that comes up.
It's adding now.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, I think we've lost Ji Hoon. Are you there? Ji? Oh, I guess he's having some problems.
I'm just trying to reconnect.
All right, now.
Okay. There you are.
Okay, so I think what I'll actually do is I provided a link to a Google Drive, and it's a little large file since our video, so everybody could just kind of see it as I talk about some things. I think that might be the best idea rather than trying to share this ginormous PowerPoint of mine.
Okay.
All right, so yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so for folks who are wondering where that link would be, it's if you go into the chat and you click on everyone, you can see that he's posted the Google Drive there, so you can go in and have a look at the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Right, take it away.
Yeah. So I teach various classes, and one of them is journalism innovation. One of them is actually called social media content creation, and the last thing is I teach a little bit of coding in HTML, CSS, and PHP. But we're talking about video journalism today, and I teach mostly seniors and juniors, and I think the biggest problem they come in with is sometimes they don't know what a story is. So my take on video is that do the little things right. So I try to focus a lot when I start teaching. I always start with audio, and then I always begin with the storytelling, what an arc is, what is an actual story, and then I really go into the technical stuff. So in my classes, I've really covered uh, things like video storytelling. I don't know if you've ever seen Great Big Story by CNN. But they do very cinematic things, very feature-like. So we do stories like that. For my social media class, it's a combination of marketing and journalism students. And our school is, we have integrated marketing communications, and then we also have the journalism side. So I have to teach it in a way where both of them are getting as much as they can. So we do assignments like Tasty Video. I don't know if you've ever seen those videos that pop up on your Facebook feed. They look scrumptious, and it's just like a how-to video of how to make a chicken parmesan or something like that. And what I found that teaches students is a lot of students who get out of class, we're still going through that transition. We talked about accreditation earlier. We're still trying to figure out how we can get video to these students, because we can see that video is much more prominent both in advertising and journalism. Going back to video journalism, the Tasty videos really teach them how to first get introduced to software such as Adobe Premiere Pro, After Effects, and Photoshop for a little bit. And then I do other events like, just look at we try to be a little bit innovative. We'll play with drones, and then I also teach this technique, storytelling with text. So they actually have to tell, they have to be able to create a video that the audience can watch without sound, because from the last time I checked, I think 85% of video are watched without sound. And that doesn't actually mean that they become less engaged just because they don't have sound. So I try to, when I grade them, I watch it with sound and without sound and see if I could get the gist of the story. So we cover a lot in video journalism. I think we're having to do it a lot more. But like you said in Snapchat, I'm a video person by nature. So when I see vertical video, I cringe and I don't like it. But I understand that that's really integrated now. So for example, like the Tasty video, when they create it, when you create a video that's a normal 16:9 ratio, and it's just like the rectangle, you don't have as much real estate on your phone screen. But if you create it in a vertical or in a square, that's actually going to cover a lot more of your phone screen. So that has a little bit more engaging effect, and it's a little bit more impactful. So these are some of the assignments that my students do in my journalism innovation. And as we talked about augmented reality and virtual reality, I'm doing an experiment this semester where I'm actually giving them an assignment of covering everything in 360 video. So they'll get I have 6 cameras here, and I'll give it out to them, and they have to pitch a story to me. But I think that the number one question I always ask is why? Why use this? Why use that? And a lot of them say, this is a term they use, it's just cool, right? And I tell them that's not good enough to just use it just because it's cool. It needs to have an effect. But I keep reminding my students that there needs to be a reason, and there is a use for drones. When when they first started learning about drones, they want to use a drone for everything, right? So kind of reminding them that these are just tools, but really the important matter is the actual story. So I try to teach them the foundational reporting and to make sure they're getting the actual story, and then tools second. But I do focus on a lot about how to do Premiere Pro and After Effects and all this other software to get them, I guess, equipped, because they won't be able to have ideas of how to tell the story in a different platform, or a different how they present the information if they don't know what's out there or what's available for them to use. So I would like to, if you can ask me questions about pretty much anything, and you can see all the examples. These are all student done. And the other thing I didn't talk about was we also do sometimes live streams. And we'll live stream an event, and they'll actually do a 4-camera live shoot where they use only their mobile phones. They'll create lower thirds for them, and they'll be tweeting or Facebooking and commenting during the live streaming. So I'll open up for questions of any of those that I've mentioned, and I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, if anyone has any questions, can you please raise your hand? Summer Harlow has a question.
Hi, thank you for that. Mike, I was looking at some of the videos that you posted in the link, and I saw that on the one about the march in Canton, that in the bottom right-hand corner it had a little icon with NBC News. Does that mean that particular video section came from NBC?
Yes. So like a syndicate, use a small portion of it. So a lot of the animated with storytelling, for example, Now This is particularly famous for this style, and they started it long time ago with seasoned reporters. They had reporters from the ABC News and other various newspapers, and they started it, and it got so big, and then as you can see now, CNN utilizes it, ABC utilizes it. So, but all their content is not original. It's all from a sock, or it's from that. So I try to teach them that you can't grab all their video and then just put words on it and try that. If you're going to use it, you always have to source it in a way. And we will have a library of video. For example, we would subscribe to CNN, so we can use their footages, but to make sure we attribute it somewhere along the line.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, G. That was brilliant. Thank you so much for running from your class to come and speak with us. We really appreciate it.
No problem.
Yeah, thank you. So where we're at now, and I'm conscious of time, and we're probably all, who knew sitting at the computer could be so exhausting? But I thought what would be great is if for 15 minutes, if maybe we could just break out into smaller discussion groups. Now, I've never done this before. We're hoping it's going to work. But what we were hoping is that I was thinking we could break into 2 groups, and I will do that on my end. And if in your group you could actually appoint someone as your group leader, so this person could just take a few notes based on what your group is talking about, and send the notes to myself and or David. Between us, we will get them. But I thought what we could talk about in our rooms was how do you stay current in the field when it comes to technology? So what do you do? Perhaps you could tell us what your best assignment is, or best assessment that you're using with your classes. What challenges are you facing when it comes to social media and mobile journalism? And then what are your best tools, or maybe your best apps that you're using that perhaps we may not have heard of? So I don't know if you want to just take a moment to jot down a few of those questions. But ultimately, just have a chat in your groups to kind of figure out, what exactly is that, what are we facing here? What are the issues? So I'm going to start this now. Now, in both groups, we won't be able to hear each other. So we'll allow this to go for the next 15 minutes. So I take that at 4:45 BST. I'll bring everyone back into the room. So hopefully this will work. So I'll start now. We're in the main room. Right.
Hello.
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 Who is in this? All right. David, G, and me. And Lisa. So we'll zoom out here so we can see each other. Yes, I don't know where we would like to start.
I think you've got a good agenda there. So how do you stay current? It's a tough question, but it's a good one to go for.
Yeah. So how do you stay current in the field? You seem to be on top of it with 360 video and drones. So, I'm listening going, oh, we couldn't even imagine to have some of that stuff at our place.
I read a lot. That's mainly my source. I try to stay on top of technology, and I try to read in both marketing and journalism. Follow Pointer, I'll follow Neiman Lab, I'll follow any journalism resource that I can find. And then like for VR, I know like Google is trying to really push that out in VR and 360. So they actually have a page on Medium, Journalism 360, I believe, and they have all the journalists, New York Times journalists, and all those other folks who are doing this, and they'll write blogs about it, on how to do it, and their experience. Because the exciting part about something like VR and drone journalism is that people are figuring things out, and there's not really a right answer. So, and drones, I'm a very big geek in terms of I love technology, and that's mainly what I teach here. And I try to attend conferences if I can about drones and drone journalism and all sorts of things here in the United States.
Okay. David, how about you?
Yes, I think it's a tough one to think about. I followed you there on reading what's happening and following it around, but there's so much happening. It's very difficult to keep pace with this. I remember when I came across into teaching journalism full time and researching it 10 years ago. And one of the things that was happening then was there was a constant flow of things. We need your students to be able to do video and do this and do that and do the other. And everyone was just getting fretful about this mountain of new skills that were coming in and being demanded by organisations that were supposedly employing our students when they went out. I think one thing we do, we've got a project going here that's been going for a good few years called Jesmond Local. It's a hyperlocal journalism site, and it's run by Ian Wiley, who was a section editor on the Guardian newspaper. He now works freelance, but he works for the Financial Times, Monaco Magazine, all sorts, and he is really interested in that. So having one person in the team who you can sort of pass that on to in a way, not just him, but the students. So Jesmond Local is where our students work in real-time journalism. In Jesmond's a suburb of Newcastle. They're reporting on it as if they were the local, I was going to say newspaper, but it's obvious it's all digital. And it started off as an idea where they could get real life, real world experience without having to take 2 weeks work placement somewhere and not know how it was going to work out and come back. And they're doing real stuff throughout the year. They can mold it around their course. But it turned into a place where they can experiment. It's a laboratory of inquiry, in Donica Mensing's words, where so the students themselves are looking out and doing the reading and finding out what new projects, new ideas are coming out, and they are trying them out. So they can find out what's there, they can try it out, they can see if it works, and not just to work as an interesting bit of technology, but can they use it in a project that people will be interested in? So does it bring something new to something they would be doing? And as part of that news service for that community. And I think that's probably the way we stay connected there.
Okay. How about you, Lisa?
I copy my students and then the students copy me. And that is, if I can describe this, when I started teaching journalism, I wasn't really on MySpace or anything like that. So I copied my students and they taught me all about it.
Yeah.
Then I was interested in this thing called Twitter that just started, and I got really into that. And they copied me, and I got them to be early adopters, and the rest is history. So essentially, that's what I do. Essentially, I think you just have to pick things up like a magpie as a teacher, educator. But actually, you can download all of these apps. That's absolutely fine. It's how people actually use them, following how they use them, consume them, and how then organisations are using them. Because sometimes you see the illogicality of how news organisations use the new technologies without seeing that actually their consumers are doing it in a much more sophisticated, interesting, and integrated way.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I would say for me, I just love going to conferences and meeting people. I mean, yeah, and doing things like this. I mean, it's, you know, it's a great opportunity. I would rather talk to my colleagues than, you know, I mean, obviously I'm reading and, you know, much like what you say, and, you know, and also taking notes from, you know, the students as well. But, you know, going to the World Journalism Education Congress and, you know, and meeting people there, from all over the world, and realizing, well, what are they doing in Southeast Asia, and what are they doing in South America, and, you know, what are the challenges that they're facing, you know, in Germany, and what are the, you know, what are the challenges faced in America, you know. And it's like, it's just having the exposure to the various different things that we're doing, because we're all on the quest to do the same thing, you know. I mean, we're all teaching fundamental principles, but we're just doing it in a completely different way. So yeah, I love going to it. And AEJMC in Chicago with all the American journalists last summer or in July, was just absolutely fascinating. Not only to see how their conferences run differently, but how in America journalism is just, you know, I was there talking about Snapchat, but, you know, everything that they were talking about was Instagram story. But we're not using Instagram story over here. So, you know, so I find that fascinating. Why in the UK are we not using Instagram story, but in the US it's being taught across all journalism programs pretty much. So yeah, I find it quite fascinating, you know, in terms like that. So what about assessment? Your favorite assessment, your best assessment? Lisa, do you have a best assessment that you like?
I actually like the assessments where the students build the artifact themselves from scratch.
Right.
And then we essentially ask them to put content in it, although I know a lot of journalism teachers hate that word content, but there's no way around it. That's what we're teaching, and so that the students have the ownership of it. Mm-hmm. So whether that's a website, a blog, that's what works. I think the whole notion, there was a slide in Anthony's presentation about NBC embracing Snapchat, and they've done great work on it, but there was one particular quote on it slightly rankled with me, which it said, it was an editor saying, we invite our people to come under the tent with us in Snapchat. And I thought, well, actually no, the tent is covering all of us, and actually we as journalists might have to go into other people's tents, actually, in Snapchat and everything. So that just, again, is that slight lag of perceptions within our own journalism industry, which doesn't speak to our students now.
Yeah. Okay. G, how about you? Do you have a favorite assessment?
Yeah, I think my favorite assessment is publishing, whether it's publishable or not. So, for example, we just did experimental audio assignment, where it was just a fun assignment where they had to interview a couple at our university, and they had to find an audio and edit it down to a minute and a half, write a paragraph introducing them, get 4 photos, and then they had to put it on the web on a feature section of the student newspaper. And 30 submitted theirs, and then I think 14 actually made it into that piece. And then telling them that it's okay that it's not there, but if you work on these things, you can get there, right? So I think they need to know what is actually good work. And I try to ask them when they submit something, do you think you can see this on your feed, and would you watch it? Right? And for the most part, I think they're pretty honest with themselves and say, well, no, I wouldn't watch it. And they know what's wrong with it. So I try to assess as realistic as possible. Is it publishable? Is it ready? If not, what can we do to make it ready? So I try to incorporate that in all my assignments.
Okay. All right. David?
Yes, I'm thinking about that. We had one thing that's informed our teaching here was years ago. You spoke about the value of conferences, and I was at one a while ago in Liverpool, John Moores, and there was Mark Harrison was there. He was at the time who was head of digital for BBC TV, and he was saying how the organisation worked in different ways. That rather than have a set project and everyone had a particular role in it, and they even had a set of skills they brought to it, they put people in creative clusters and said, get on with it and bring it back to us. And he said, putting people together in groups with different backgrounds and things, he said, we're not looking for skill set, we're looking for mindset, which is a nice little phrase, not quite sure exactly what it means, but you get a feel for it. And he said it sparks off creativity and sparks off ideas. So one thing we do with our students is we've got a long, thin module, which is still appallingly called Multimedia Journalism Principles and Practice. We need to change the name, but we're doing it. It's a place where we can experiment. And part of that is the first half of it is we're teaching and the students are learning the basic interviewing, writing news reports, writing profiles, doing them on writing features, doing them on different platforms. And the second half is when they're put into groups, and they are put into groups. They don't choose the groups anymore. We have complaints about that, but it sparks off lots of things. And they come out and we said, right, get on and do a project. But we want to see at the end of it something more than we've taught you. We want you to bring to it something new. We want to see how you've been creative and innovative and not just reproduced what we've been working with you on. And it's not always, you don't always get something wonderful, but every so often you do get something wonderful, and we do get something that's generally above average, I think, on the things they do. So that being asked to find something and create and innovate and experiment is, I think, something that I'm quite pleased with and does pay dividends at times.
So is that kind of like entrepreneurial journalism then, what you're having them do?
Yes, well, they're creating a multimedia project, so it could be entrepreneurial. It can be working with different people, with different groups. We've had some quite lightweight things, lots of different kinds of food in Newcastle, so, but then we've had some quite heavyweight things, which have been working with refugee groups, working with trans communities, working with disabled groups, looking at serious social projects, and they've tried to do it in a way which has brought in some really excellent journalism that's been delivered in an innovative manner. So that's asking them to be creative. Really is just the core to it.
Okay. So the third question is, what are the challenges you are facing when it comes to social media and mobile journalism? So, G, you seem to be so advanced. Personally, I'm sitting here going, oh my God, the University of Mississippi is where it's at. But what kinds of challenges are you facing?
Man, it's hard. It's definitely hard because it's changing so quick. You see, one day it's Facebook Live, and the next day it's completely different. There's a merger now Instagram, Facebook. So it's like, I think, I forgot who said this, but how do you teach something and knowing that it might not be the next big thing, right? It might be completely gone. So I try to not put all my eggs in one basket, and I try to teach them foundational things. That way, if they have the foundations of video storytelling, they could apply it, whether they use sequencing in Snapchat, whether they use that in Great Big Story, or now this, because they understand what a story is. So just not fully spending as much time just on one platform, and just trying to do the little things and the basic things. Like I think for me that's the biggest challenge. It's just hard.
How about you, Lisa?
And I think, yes, going on from that is the curricular design thing as well, because I think actually we have to think about the design of them in terms of foundation, as you said, rather than either siloed, which is quite a traditional way of doing it, and we do a little bit of that because we just have to for timetables and resources and teaching, but perhaps I have a more sort of foundation tree of journalism learning in terms of storytelling, reporting, all of that, with all of these other aspects which we can be agile with and introduce new things within that without getting stuck on one particular element, because otherwise I think we had one year where it's all about Periscope, and I just, after a while I was just thinking, really, you know, this isn't going to really change my life, Periscope.
Yeah.
But it's very easy to get fixated on one thing.
Yeah. How about you, David?
Yes, I'd endorse that, both of what you're saying there. I think you need that solid core of understanding and abilities that are there. Recognizing what a story is what's really important and interesting to people, what's going to get them on board, why they're going to say, yes, I care about that.
And just sorry to interrupt, I was just going to add to that actually our accreditation bodies need to be more aware of that agility and flexibility, and perhaps become one accreditation body if they are going to sort of survive and really support journalism education.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's it. Also, I think the other big thing at the moment, a sort of core thing, is sort of the way you relate to the people you're working for, and I don't mean the employer, I mean the publics. Trying to get away from using that word audience, because I think it's not just that broadcasting one-way traffic. The journalist decides what's the important thing and passes it out there. It's about finding ways to work with those people and build those networks. So you're part of a network. And I think those are the two things. So what's really important to people? How do we get that conversation going, and how do we provide that story, that narrative?
Yeah.
And the rest.
I would say for me, one of the key things is one of the challenges I'm facing is actually learning how to use all these apps and kit and technology myself before I can then go and teach it. You know, actually engaging with it and saying, okay, well, how do I use it? Now, how can I go ahead and teach it? How does that fit into what I'm already doing? You know, because, you know, I'm not in a luxurious place where, you know, I'm only teaching, you know, mobile journalism. You know, I teach community and digital engagement on a communication studies degree, and then I'm teaching a media and trauma class on another degree, and, you know, and it's, so journalism is, you know, it ends up, because we're so piecemeal, we only end up doing a little bit at a time, and, you know, what can you do in those 2 hours that you've got them for that week? You know, so I feel like for me it's about staying up to date on what's new and, you know, relevant, but then how do I use it? So learning how to use it and then having to teach it. So I've just looked at the time and realized we need to go back into the room. So I'm just going to bring us all back now. Hello. The room has changed. Are we all back? Oh gosh, the other guys are reconnecting.
Hello.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
Are we all still here?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, so we're all back in the room. Okay, so I thought we would just spend another 10 minutes or so just talking now as a group about what we talked about in our breakout session. So should we just start at the top in terms of, like, how do you stay current in the field when it comes to technology? I don't know if your reporter wants to feed that back to us.
Who is our reporter?
Or maybe
before you joined, we decided it was you.
So maybe you just, okay, well, there's small of us. There's only 6 of us, so, you know, we can probably have a conversation.
I can summarize to that one that One of us has the benefit of younger relatives who can be taught, prevailed upon to teach the new technology, but they don't like it if when you touch the screen it doesn't do something. So it's, you know, there was an aversion to that. I said I was a grumpy old man. My phone, the one I've currently got, cost 12 quid. I had a smartphone. I resented spending my very low salary on it in order to learn a skill the university wanted me to have. When it broke, I refused to replace it because I can read a map and I don't have any other use for it. But I taught myself mobile journalism. But and I've decided that I have suffered career-wise because I've invested time learning mobile journalism and doing other things instead of research. But now I'm going to have to do research instead because that will progress my career, and so I'm not going to spend time learning technologies. And Sally Ann also has had to provide her own phone, and it's not an iPhone 7 is what I was gathering.
Well, Simon.
Yeah. Hi,
Simon, I have a hell of a lot of data. So if you need research data, I'm more than happy for you to look at it and co-author whatever you like.
Okay, that's wonderful. I have no idea how to do research, but I'll talk to Anne about it next time she's up at Coventry.
Okay, sounds good.
It looks like Anne is my mentor on research as well. So it looks like all the roads lead to Anne at this point.
Oh, God help me. God, you get one good idea. But Sally Ann, do you have to provide your own kit?
Yes. I mean, I just use my own smartphone, and I do get a laptop, so it's a pretty up to the minute laptop, so I'm quite happy with that. But as we were talking about that, I was actually thinking, well, we expect the students to provide that equipment themselves as well. You know, I did in my first class with my master's group ask them if they all had smartphones, and they just laughed at me. But I was thinking that, you know, they have invested in that themselves for their own purposes, but then we're asking them to use that as a university, as part of the university course. But I mean, we do have other kit for the students, but it's not mobile kit. And that Anthony's talk actually made me think that maybe we should be moving away from the more professional camera kit type things that we have to investing in more mobile kit. But then it's very difficult to deal with that in terms of borrowing equipment and ensuring that everything's returned. So there are issues there.
Yeah.
Could I come in on that? Our loan shop, I would like our students to be using tripods and lights and microphones with their smartphones. We are now giving them decent iRig microphones, but in terms of cradles and that you can attach things to, our loan shop won't do it because the shape of phones keeps changing, so the kit will become obsolete. Our proposal, we give the students laptops, MacBook Pros, and our proposal is to give them iPad Pros instead, so that they can shoot and edit. But that's so we're covered. You know, if their phones are full of games and pictures they don't want to delete, at least they can use the iPad Pro. Everyone is covered, and they've all got an iOS product, which seems to be essential.
Yeah.
Because if you're teaching some of them on iOS with iMovie, that's not they're not getting the same experience as people with Android phones who cannot use iMovie with its multi-track editing.
Yeah, I wonder if we could bring G in on this. I don't know. What do you do at the University of Mississippi?
Yeah, so, Simon, you're right. It's hard keeping up with. We also use iRig, but we don't have it available. But I actually require this little thing right here This is pretty standard. It fits every single phone. As it's just a spring thing, and then it has a tripod mount right in the bottom, both here. You know, they could spend $5 for that. So a lot of them say, I don't have a DSLR. Well, you have your phone that shoots 4K nowadays, or whatever it is. It shoots some sort of video. So this is a quick way. And then I actually require a small mini tripod for the phone. So all in all, I try not to ask them to spend a lot of money, but at least $10, and you know, everybody could shell that out. So that's my current, I guess, answer to that in terms of how to deal with this, you know, this new iPhones coming out and sizes changing, and this has done well.
Does the University of Mississippi loan out any kits, or are students expected to provide all their own?
No, we do have DSLRs, we have some video cameras, and then we have tripods available. So at least if they get this, they have tripods. But you know, our school has grown to 1,600 students, and it's getting larger. So your 600 students can't share all this equipment. So I'm having to not necessarily require this and then allow them to use their phone, other than because they'll come into the checkout and they won't have any cameras left anymore. So I just can't make it a requirement to shoot in a certain equipment just because of the, I guess, limited equipment that we have right now.
Okay. Just for the sake of time, I'm just going to ask question number 3. What are the challenges that you personally are facing when it comes to social media and mobile journalism? Now, Amanda, you're still working in the field, aren't you?
Yep.
Yeah. So what challenges do you face, or do your students face? What do you face?
I don't feel like I'm facing challenges. I feel like I have chosen particular social media platforms that are giving me enormous power to do stories that could not have been done before. So I'm just having the most fabulous time with it, and also using it in class. So when I have a class, I just join them all up to a Facebook group that I create, and then when I do an exercise in class, I will ask them to post their thing to the Facebook group, and I just throw it on the wall and we discuss it. I ask them to analyse I ask the rest of the class to analyse their lead, for example, and that becomes a talking point. So it's really useful in class discussion. I also use not necessarily social media, but web-based communication in my journalism. So I'm doing a story at the moment for The Guardian, which is a story where the action happened in England. The news sources are in Australia and in England, and so I'm communicating with everybody and pulling the whole thing together to publish back in England.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've got another one as well where the main news source is in England, but the story happened in Australia.
Right. Okay. All right. Sally-Ann, are you facing any challenges?
I would say that my main challenge is time management. I feel a sort of hunger to keep up with all the different social media formats, and therefore I get distracted very easily, and I'd really probably need to manage my time a bit better. So that's my main challenge.
Okay. Okay, Lisa?
I think one of the things that I notice is that our students actually are still very much on Facebook, but journalists tend to live on Twitter. And so sometimes you have these different channels of discussions going on. You just assume too many things when you're teaching. So again, you do have to be across all of these things as an educator.
Yeah. Okay, so does anyone have any final comments that they'd like to say, or anything they'd like to share? Or
I'd like to answer this last question. What are your best tools or apps that we may not have heard of?
Yeah, please.
There is an app here which was developed in Queensland called Sound Trails, or spelt as all one word, and it is a geolocative audio app which allows stories to be created in an audio format with photos and with video, which geolocate to a place. So a person can if there's internet access where the location of the stories are, that's fine. You just walk into that story and the app will know that you're there and will play the story to you. And so people use them as tourist guides, generally speaking, but what I'm doing is using the app for telling news stories that belong to particular places. And I think there's a huge possibility here, especially to do with things like weather and climate, where, let's say there was a flood in a particular place, you can use sound trails to say, well, here are some photographs, here are the last, like you might date the floods that people might remember. You can link photographs to that. And so someone could be driving along, drive into the sound field, and will all of a sudden say to them, this is a hot spot for flash flooding, so that they become aware of that. And in this country, it's really important. So they actually geolocate the information people need at the time they need it.
That's a pretty cool app, it sounds like. Gosh, I think we may have to look into that one.
I've written that down.
Yeah,
So
I think we all have, Simon. Does anyone else have any other apps or anything they'd like to share?
I would say Banjo. It's actually free for educators, and it's great because it actually has, like Sound Trails, it has a geolocation, but it gets every single social media feed on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and then puts it on a geolocation. So, for example, from the Las Vegas shooting, you could see where the story broke and what was the first, the breaking of it. The education has a 24-hour range. You can only go back 24 hours, but it's very useful to find stories, to find where it broke, find sources. And then the other thing is CrowdTangle, so that's also free for educators. And you can put, for example, our newspaper here, you can put it all in almost like a spreadsheet, and it tells you their interactions and compare it with other school newspapers. You could do that with journalism schools, and it tells you the interaction rates, and it gives you a lot of analytics, and this is all free for, I believe, educators.
And that was called CrowdTangle?
Yeah, CrowdTangle.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you. Right, does anyone have anything else they'd like to share or speak about before we end?
I just like to say that was very helpful, that last bit, because I was going to say one of the challenges with social media is getting them to do things together, and so getting stuff on Twitter and stuff on Facebook and then making it visible to each other is so difficult. So thanks to you for that last one.
Yeah, you can do the same thing with Hootsuite.
Hootsuite.
Hootsuite, that does it.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, fabulous.
I have a couple of chapters that are nearly ready for you, Anne.
I wasn't going to say anything, but thank you, Amanda. I appreciate that. So I guess just looking forward, I'm just going to share my final screen with you. Thank you all for, Amanda, you've stayed up. I don't even want to know what time it is in New Zealand right now. People have been, coming in between classes and things like that. But I just kind of wanted to ask, like, moving forward, what should we do another webinar at some point? If we do, what topics? Have we missed anything? I mean, this was the first of its kind, and but it was the first one I've run, and I think it's, as Robin said, it's the first that WJEC has engaged with as well. But yeah, I'm just trying to get some feedback in terms of what do you think? Is this helpful? Was it just a waste of time? I mean, I have a survey link for you, and I would appreciate if you wouldn't mind giving some feedback. It's a Survey Monkey. That's the link. And if you fill it out and add your email address to it, I can also send you the Google Drive link with all the PowerPoints. So I'll incorporate all the different speakers today and everything that they've sent. But does anyone have any preliminary thoughts before we sign off?
I think it's a fabulous tool. I think that from my point of view in Australia, if you can do your seminar from say 9 till 11 in the morning, that's a more reasonable hour for me. It's 2 a.m. here in Australia. So yeah, that's not long before I have to be up again.
Yeah. Apologies, I didn't mean to say you were in New Zealand. It was New Zealand where we met.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay,
but I think it would be wonderful. I think given that we are spread all around, if we were able to collaborate on some co-authored papers and things, pulling together the bits of information that we have, I think it has great potential to be able to share the knowledge that we are generating with a lot of people who need it. There's lots and lots of lecturers out there who need the information, and at the moment in the university where I am, there are lecturers who haven't been in the industry for 20 years, and what they're teaching is so out of date that it's absolutely useless. And this is the feedback I get from the students. Because I'm working in industry, they come to me for mentoring because they're just not learning what's necessary. And I think that's really, really sad.
Okay.
I would just like to say, Anne, thank you very much for putting on this webinar. I found it really stimulating, absolutely fascinating, and I think it's a great way of staying in contact with colleagues who are doing so much innovative work and to be able to take inspiration from them. I mean, I particularly enjoyed hearing from our colleagues from abroad in America and Amanda over in Australia. And we might not have known about their work if it hadn't been for you bringing everybody together like this. Not all of us can actually get to conferences now because of funding reasons, so this is a great way of us actually maintaining contact and getting to know each other.
Yeah. Could I just ask, seeing there's only 6 of us left, but how do we feel about the time? Was it too long? Was it too short? Is it just right? I mean, it's been 3 hours.
Oh, 3 hours. Okay, I only got the last 2 hours. I miscalculated my timings, obviously.
That's okay.
But yes, good, very good. I think 3 hours it's less than half a day, and I think the value from my point of view is there.
Okay, great. Thank you, Amanda. Sally-Ann?
I think at the moment, today it was fine for me for 3 hours, but as we get further into the teaching session, then I think it would be more difficult for me to be able to devote 3 hours. But the fact that you're recording these means that we can dip into them ourselves later on. So maybe a mix of sessions, maybe you could have some that are only an hour long that we could perhaps do early morning or lunchtime that might suit people abroad as well. And maybe some longer ones when the subject actually deserves to be treated in a longer way.
Okay. Is there any particular subjects that people are interested in?
Yeah, it's Simon, can I come in here?
Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, maybe to get around the timing, some of the things that were delivered, everything was delivered live, but it's only really the discussion and the questions that needed to be live. I suppose some aspects of it could have been pre-recorded and distributed, but then, I mean, there'd be problems with that, I recognize, in terms of questions immediately after. A big issue for us is in Coventry is international students, particularly on our MA course, the difficulties of teaching international students with limited experience of English language alongside native speakers. And one group gets left behind, the other group resents having to be held back. And we're experimenting, I hope, this year with ways to deal with that, particularly using radio, which seems to overcome some of the barriers.
Okay, thank you. David, did you have anything to add? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Amanda.
Even though I'm not teaching much, I do a few guest lectures, so I'm not a lecturer or an educator in the full-time sense of the word, but because I have recent journalism experience, I wonder if it would be useful to the group if I talk to you about some of my recent investigations, so the international investigations and the media that I use.
Yeah.
And how that works out.
Okay, that's fab. Okay, so I'll put that down. I'll put you down for a future speaking engagement.
Simon's on his bike.
Yeah, Simon's heading out the door, so I think that's probably a cue for all of us.
Running club tonight, so I don't have any choice about this. They go when they go.
Yeah, no, sure. Well, colleagues, I just want to thank you so much for participating today, for your contributions, to David and G, our speakers, to Lisa, for giving up your time and, participating and sharing your knowledge with us today. And thank you to our participants who have stayed up late and who've given up their afternoons to be with us today. So thank you so much. And I will, if you have a chance to fill out the survey, I'll just put that up one last time for you. If you can go to the Survey Monkey, that would be great. I'm also going to send it out via email, Mexa, Twitter. So hopefully I will grab all the people who have been at the webinar today and hopefully get some feedback. But thank you very much for your participation.
And thank you, Anne, as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Have a good evening.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.